but we're glad you're here. We're talking about ways to keep our bodies in good health. The psalmist wrote one time, "We are fearfully and wonderfully made." Amen. And when I finished my first year working on my doctorate in preventive care, the first summer we spent taking a human body apart, see how it was made. 8 hours a day we did anatomy, and all summer, and the bones and the brain and the body and how it all worked, and it was very fascinating. And the more you study about the body, the more amazing it is. It's God's wonderful creation. Amen. And one way we can show our honor and appreciation to God is to take good care of it, isn't it? If somebody gives us a gift, what do? Take good care of it. That's right. Pastor, I'd like to add just a little bit to your thought there. It was a good thought. You don't have to be an athlete to get exercise. Moderate exercise is good for all of us. And particularly if a person is trying to lose weight, we find that moderate activity done over a little longer time is more effective in mobilizing body fat out of the body cells, the fat cells, and using that for energy than is high-intensity exercise. The people who run really fast, they're running almost entirely on glycogen. That's stored carbohydrate in the muscle. So they're not mobilizing fat. But if you go moderately and go a little longer, and the longer you go, the more fat you mobilize. We have to teach that when we're teaching people to run the first marathon. You don't run a marathon by sprinting, do you? You have to go easy because you got 26 miles to go. And so we would tell them to go easy. And if they had any oomph left, they could use that in the last few miles and go faster. Because as you exercise, the more you exercise, pretty soon, after about 45 minutes or so to an hour, you're burning almost purely fat. In the first half hour of exercise, you're burning only a small part of fat. And so the activity that you get by going at a moderate pace, a little longer, is effective that way. Just thought about that while he was mentioning that. One other thing I want to mention before we get started here too much too is that how many of you here are perfect? Let me show of hands here. Oh, somebody, I can see a couple of people going, you know. So if I talk about something you're not perfect in yet, is that okay? Because I'm in that category too. And don't feel bad. I was at a Montana conference a few years ago giving health for their camp meeting. And my sister was walking with a lady, and she asked my sister, "Where are you going?" She said, "Oh, I'm going to go hear this speaker on health." She says, "Oh, I don't want to go there." She says, "I feel bad enough already." And sometimes people think of health, or don't do this and don't do that, don't eat this, don't drink that, all of these things. But what we're going to talk about are things you can do to have better health. And I like to think of it this way. God never asks us to give up anything or to do something if it isn't for our own best good. So think of these messages of health as a love letter from God. He wants us to be well. He wants us to be happy. He wants us to live a long time. He wants us to have a full life. And if we think of that perspective, then there's always things we can learn. There's always things that we can do to make improvements. So we come to church each week not because we're perfect, because we're on the way, aren't we? Trying to make improvements in our lives. And so it's the same in health. We're not perfect in health, but it's good for us to remember these things once in a while and to talk about them and to help us to learn other things we can do to have better health. I'd like to start with this verse from John 10:10. It's a very positive view. Christ talking about his mission, why he came here to earth. First of all, it talks about the thief. Notice it says the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. Now, who's Jesus talking about? Who's the thief? Satan. Has he done his job well? When you look at all the health problems in the world today, people's lives are lost. And as we go through talking about the power of prevention when we're doing things in the right way and how it can prevent so many diseases, we can see how Satan has been very successful in deceiving people, taking away their health and their joy and their happiness and long life. But what does Jesus say? I have come that they may have what? Life. And what kind of life? Abundant life. Or as in the bulletin, in another translation, it says a full life. Would you like a full life? A happy life, abundant life? That's what God wants to give us. And so we're going to talk about ways we can improve our health and enjoy that full life. So our goals today, we want to look and feel our best. Now, when you're talking about the gym and the television and so on, people are always talking about how you look. And that's important too, isn't it? And how we feel. But what's really important is how healthy we are, isn't it? So we want to enjoy good health. We want to live a long life, a fuller life. And we're going to look at reviewing the current evidence and research that's published today in good medical journals that help us to see what is most effective. What can we do that makes the most difference? Does that make sense? There's lots of philosophies and ideas out there, but do we have good evidence that will make a difference in our life? So that's what we're going to be looking at. Now, I'm going to start with this thought. How valuable is your health? I used to have $1 million bill in my pocket. Have you ever had one of those? You can get them at the dollar store. And I'd pull out my $1 million bill and I'd say, well, now, how many of you would like to have $1 million, but all you have to do is be sick and miserable the rest of your life? Nobody, no takers. One time a guy did lift his hands and he says, Doc, he says, I'm sick and miserable all the time anyway. I'll take the $1 million. But if you don't have your health, what do you have? You don't have anything, do you? And so I found this quote from a doctor from Northern Africa. It says, when health is, this was back 300 years before the time of Christ. It says, when health is absent, wisdom cannot reveal itself, art cannot manifest, strength cannot fight, wealth becomes useless, and intelligence cannot be applied. So how valuable is our health? Everything depends on it, doesn't it? The moment our heart stops beating, all of the goals and desires and talents and abilities that we have, it all stops, doesn't it? So whatever we can do to keep our bodies in good health, it provides the foundation for the wisdom and the art and the strength and all the talents that God has given us to do. This is a quotation from an early, in our church history. Ellen White was an early writer and a promoter of healthy living. And she makes this comment, and I think is a good one. It says, health is a treasure. Of all temporal possessions, it is the most precious. And we realize that when we lose our health, don't we? To keep the body in a healthy condition, in order that all parts of the living machinery may act harmoniously, should be what? A study of our life. So that's what we're doing this morning. Studying ways that can make a big difference in our life, in our health, and being able to achieve that abundant life. We're going to look at several studies. I think I went 2, didn't I? There we go. We're going to look at 3 large studies that have been done. We call these epidemiological studies, which is a big name for studying large groups of people. And they give them questionnaires, and they test their health, and they measure things. Then they follow those large groups of people for many years to see what happens. Basically, who lives and who dies, who gets heart disease and who doesn't, who gets diabetes and who doesn't. Then they go back and analyze all the data they've gathered, and they see what we call associations. And things such as, if they smoked, was there a higher mortality rate? If they exercised, was there a lower mortality rate? Now, some of these things we know today, of course, but you want to have evidence for it. And so that's what the research does. So these 3 large studies, the first one's called the Alameda Good Health Practices Studies. The first study done that I'm aware of in the United States, where they took this large group of people and followed them for nearly 10 years, and then analyzed the data to see who lived longer and who didn't. And it's very interesting. They found 7 basic health habits that were strong predictors of a long, healthy life. We'll look at that in a moment. Then there's the Adventist Health Study. Someone was talking last night about that. John, I think you were in that group. Is that right? Anybody else here that was in that group? It was done a few years ago, right here. Very good. I was in that group. And so they followed several thousand people. Now, they've had 2. They had an early one where they had about, 35,000 people. Did I remember right? No, 34,000 people. And then the big one at the end was almost 100,000 people, and they followed for many years. And we'll look at some of the research that they're finding in a moment here. And they found a lot of data that relates to good health. And then the last one here is probably the longest and one of the most complete studies ever done. It was done by Harvard University, where they had 123,000 men and women followed them for over 30 years. That's a long study, isn't it? And then they found several indicators and 5 specific, simple, basic health practices that were the best predictors of people who lived longer during that time. So let's take a look at what they found. First of all, the Alameda County. Here are the 7 health practices. We talked last night about exercise and how important it was. We'll just mention that briefly today, but we covered it fairly well last night. Healthy eating, and even people who ate breakfast regularly and didn't frequently snack. What kind of healthy things do people usually snack on? Yeah, not the best usually, is it? So when they ate regular meals and ate their breakfast, they were healthier. Good nutrition. We'll find most of them talk about good nutrition. They found that people who got adequate sleep every day lived longer. It was one of the predictors. Maintaining a healthy weight. Not smoking as we would expect. Limiting alcohol consumption. And the last one there, those who had a happy outlook on life lived longer than those who didn't. So it's not only the physical habits, it's also our mental thoughts and so on that have an effect on our health and our longevity too. So we'll follow those in more detail. Here's a quick view. Let me get my little pointer here. That shows the results of that study. And what we'll have is we'll show several graphs. So I'm going to take just a moment to explain a little bit. Usually we'll show up here what the results are. In this case, it's total mortality. And that's what they like to do a lot because it's real easy to determine. If you're alive and you have a pulse, you're in this group. If you don't have a pulse, you're in this group. So it's easy to determine. It's not difficult. And so here we show, and these are going to be called relative risk. And so we set something that we're going to compare to. In this case, we're going to look at the people who only followed 0 to 3 of those good health habits we just looked at. And then this is the chart from 0 to 1, 1 being the top. This is the rate of death, the number of people who died, and it's going to be relative. Then we compare that. So over here, the blue, by the way, is the women in this study. Notice that the women over here only have half the mortality rate, and we look down here and we see why. They're not following very good health habits, but if they were following all 7, look what had happened. Only half as many of them died. Is that good news? That's good news, isn't it? Because it means we have some choice over how our life turns out. If you look at men, look at that huge difference, men. 75%. Yeah, 75% decrease. 72. Close to 75. My wife keeps me on my toes. So does it make a difference what life we choose? Amen. And by the way, I should say right here, God doesn't force us to do most of these things. But he invites us. He says it's your choice. But if you choose to make the right choices, we have good rewards, don't we? What does the Bible say if we don't make good choices? There's consequences too, aren't there? And so we all can choose. It's up to us. But he invites us to do the things that he's given us instruction on, and that we have better results. Okay, so that's just a little brief thing. Now, over here we see a huge difference in mortality. See, it's showing it right here. And over the 9.5 years, they significantly reduced the risk of mortality. They lived longer, and they found out that they enjoyed a level of health that was similar to a person who was 20 to 30 years younger. Isn't that an amazing difference? So it's not only how long you live, but it's what? Yeah, how well you live, what good health you enjoyed during those years. When in my early days, I was a pastor in Pasco, Washington. And one of my first visits to go out was to visit a man in the nursing home. As your pastor, you like to go to where the people that can't come to church anymore and visit with him. And this gentleman had been a smoker most of his life before he joined the church. And he had emphysema. And I remember as I visited him, he was laying in bed, and it took him about 5 minutes just to get up and to sit on the bed. I could remember his hands on each side trying to get a little bit of a breath, and he could just barely breathe. And he had been that way for 10 years. Can you imagine the last 10 years of your life just fighting for every breath? Not an abundant life, is it? And so I was very impressed, thankful that I had been raised in a group where they encouraged people not to smoke. Okay, so good quality of life is what we're after. Now, here's the one of the first groups in our Outcomes of the Adventist Health Study, the first study. And in this case, They simply compared, after several years, the death rates of Adventists living in Southern California with other people living in Southern California. And they found that the Adventists lived on an average, notice here, 7.28 years longer. So then they wanted to know, well, why were they living longer? So they did the Adventist 2 study. Looked at what they were eating and how they were exercising and how much they smoked or drank or some of these kinds of things. And then they found out, well, we look at that as we're coming along. But first of all, again, they found 7 years longer. If they followed all the healthy lifestyles that they were recommending, they lived up to 10 years longer. And here were the primary things that they found. Those that ate a healthy diet. And we'll find in a little bit that that's one of the most important things you can do. So this afternoon after dinner, we're going to spend the whole time talking about healthy eating. Those who ate whole grains versus refined grains lived longer. If they had a higher intake of fruits and vegetables. If they ate nuts every day. Isn't that interesting? We find that people who eat nuts have significantly less coronary heart disease. In fact, in the Adventist Health Study, they found that those who ate nuts 5 times or more a week had only half as many heart attacks as Adventists who didn't eat nuts regularly. Big difference, isn't it? Now, how hard is it to eat a handful of nuts a day? See, some of these things aren't difficult. Other things are a little harder, like getting up in the morning and going for a half-an-hour walk. Yeah, if you come to our table, we've got 3 little bowls, and we always keep them full, and they're nuts, and we eat them almost every meal. And when we're in Hawaii, we come back with macadamia nuts, and when we're in the South, we come back with cashews, and there's lots of good ones out there, aren't they? And the almonds, they're all very good. So they're something that help us. Those who exercise regularly live longer. Those who maintain a healthy weight live longer. And most Adventists don't smoke or drink, and so they live longer too. And those were the primary reasons why they live longer than the average persons. Now, you may have heard that something called the blue zones and longevity. Have you heard about that? How many of you heard about that? There's different regions around the world where people live a long time. And this fellow from the National Geographic went and studied those populations, identified them, and found out their lifestyle. It's very interesting to go through and look at his data. I have his books at home, and I've listened to his lectures many times at the university. He comes there and speaks. And one place they found in the United States, the only place where there was the greatest number of people who lived to be over 100 years of age, and where do you suppose that was? Loma Linda. So that's the only one there, and he makes the point that, you know, they're not that different than the rest of the people of the United States except for their health practices. And so they have been studied, and the reason is because of these health practices here. Now, they went further in this second study of the Adventist Health Study too, and they also found, of course, that they lived longer, and so they compared it with different countries of the world and so on how long people lived on an average. So what we have down here, the percent of men reaching 85 years of age. Now, in Hungary, about only 8.2% do. We're just using different countries for comparison. Germany does a little better. They get up to about 14% of the population. United Kingdom aced them out just a bit there. Notice down in Australia, quite a bit better. Here we are in the United States, about 19.5% of the people in the general United States live that old. Sweden does better than the U.S. Japan has the record for the longest longevity of any people in the whole world as a nation. And they live 0.5 years. When they looked at Adventists as a whole, notice this huge difference. Almost double, isn't it? And number of men who reached 85 years of age. And then they took Adventist vegetarians, those groups of people who eat primarily plant-based diets. That's what we'll be talking about, how that can be healthy for our health. And they had the best, didn't they? Almost 50%. And almost twice as much as the best nation in the world. So we find that it does make a difference if you follow a healthy lifestyle. And now Adventist vegetarians have been declared as the longest group of people ever studied, has the best longevity of any group in the world. So that's, again, this is part of the blessing that can come as we follow healthy message. And we'll look at the current research on these as we go along. The last big study was done by Harvard, a big university. They've had the largest number of people, 123,000, in this case 34 years. And they found 5 things related to longevity. Being active, we've seen that before, haven't we? being tobacco-free, maintaining a healthy weight, making healthy food choices, and they found 10 indicators in eating, and we'll look at those this afternoon, of the best indicators for a longer life. Every one of them was, if you follow those, you'll live longer. And avoiding and limiting alcohol intake. So that's kind of like what we've seen on the rest of them. So there's a continuity, isn't it, between all of these longevity studies. Now, these are not profound things. They're just basic things, aren't they? 5 basic things if we did on a regular basis and how we would live longer. And here's the results. This is in a graph form. And remember, these are showing how many people died from any cause. And these are those who had 0 of those good health factors. They didn't exercise. They were overweight. They ate poorly. Maybe they smoked and drank. Not too different from many people in the United States, right? So if they had 0, this was their mortality rate. But even if they followed just one of those healthy lifestyle practices over the 30 years, what happened to their mortality? That's quite a little drop, isn't it? What is that? 79. So that'd be about a 21% drop, isn't it? I need to go to the eye doctor. That's my next visit. A year ago, I could see quite well. I'm not sure what's happening. But I need new glasses. And down here, if you followed 2, about almost a 40% decrease. And every time you added a healthy lifestyle factor, what happened to mortality? Is that a dramatic graph or what? When you look at that, it's very obvious that the most important thing we can do is take good care of our health. If we want to live a long time, keep our death rate down, prevent disease. Makes good sense, doesn't it? And so then they also looked at specific diseases. We talked a little bit about cancer prevention last night. Exercise, we found, was helpful in doing that. And in this study, those who followed all 5 of these positive practices cut the risk of cancer by how much? 65%. That's almost 2/3, isn't it? What if they came over the news and said, we've got a miracle drug, you take this drug, and it'll reduce your risk of cancer by 2/3? You think that would sell well? Think you'd make a lot of money? I'd like to invest in that company. But what can you do to get the same results? You don't have to go to the pharmacy. You don't have to get a prescription. We can just begin to live more healthfully, can't we? Okay? So we'll look at the specifics on those. Here, cardiovascular disease, that's heart attack and strokes. By how much? 82%. Those are amazing differences, aren't they? I was giving a lecture to a group of physicians, about 100 of them, cardiologists, up in Canada. I've spoke to a lot of different groups about healthy living. And I was going through all of these statistics and things people could do, and finally the doctor on the front row, and he raised his hand. He says, Doc. He says, we teach all of our patients to do that. He says, we'll be out of business. What are we going to do? And I said, hallelujah. Well, those are big differences, aren't they? Total mortality by 74%. Now, eventually we die. None of us escape that. But you don't have to die early. You know, we can die as late as we can, as healthy as we can. And that's our goal, isn't it? And they lived on an average 12 to 14 years longer. That was average. If you compared the people on the extremes, those who were very unhealthy and those who followed all the rules, difference in life expectancy was 20 to 22 years difference. So, longevity closely related to our lifestyle practice. Now let's get down to those, and we'll go through them very quickly here. But sleep is one of them important ones. When you're up and about, we're in a type of metabolism we call catabolism. It's a breaking down of the storage of energy and the reserves and so on. And we use it up, and we get to night, that's why we're tired. And if we don't stay up late and burn the candle at both ends, we get our sleep, then we go into a type of metabolism that's called anabolism. And that's just the opposite. It's building up everything, building up your stores of energy, restoring the body and the muscles and the brain and the cells of the body to be healthy. And so if we cut ourselves short on that, then we don't build our health back as good as we should, and we work at a suboptimal level. So what we have found over the years is one of the best things you can do to get immediate results is get a good night's sleep. We've all experienced that, haven't we? When we don't get a good sleep, how do you feel the next day? And a little grouchy sometimes, and our brain doesn't work as well, and nothing works as well. And the research shows there's more accidents and all kinds of things when people don't get enough sleep. Here's some things that happen when we do go to sleep. We just talked about the body restoring its health, even our immune system and so on. better mental and emotional health. The brain works better. We're not so, we deal with stress better, not so likely to fly off the handle if you're well rested and so on. All the things in the brain work better. We have higher energy levels. We have healthier weights. I don't go into that, but when we deal with our weight management groups, we talk about the importance of good sleep, because as your sleep goes down, you find that obesity directly goes up. There's a direct relationship there. And so that helps in preventing gaining excess weight. Better memory. It's at nighttime when our thoughts or our experiences for the day and the things that we've read and so on are turned into permanent memory. It happens when we sleep. And so it's important to get to sleep to have good memory. If you're in school and learning, try to impress upon the minds of the students that they need sleep. And, of course, lower mortality rates. And that's what this next graph shows. We'll just look at it quickly. A group of 14,000 people here followed for 12 years. Here's those who got the recommended amount of sleep. And look at mortality rates of those who got less than the 7 hours. A 43% increase in deaths from cardiovascular disease. So it's pretty clear, isn't it? The body works better, we live longer, we feel better. Everything works better when we get our sleep. And we also need time for rest and relaxation during the day, don't we? It's a modern world in which we're push, and everybody's trying to accomplish everything they can. And we need time for rest and recreation. Some time to have some fun. Let the mind and the body unwind. One of our biggest problems is stress. People get all uptight. And we need to, the way you break the stress response is with the relaxation response. I used to teach the stress management class at a hospital where I worked for several years. And it was the only class we never had to advertise month. We just put the date out. And the class, we'd take 60 people, and every time it was clear up to the maximum, 60. We did it every quarter. People feel stressed out, and what can we do? And one of the things we need to learn to do is learn to relax, learn to not always be racing the mind and the body and so on. Even a little short nap helps. I didn't put in the slides, but when you look at people and you ask them whether they nap or not, guess what? The people who take a little short nap during the day live longer than those who don't. So if you'd like a little nap, that's okay. Just don't nap too late in the afternoon. Then it interferes with your sleep, doesn't it? All right, but in time, just to rest and relax. And even the Lord knew we needed a day apart from a week. We go day after day after day, and what did he say? Take one day a week off. It's a rest day. We call it the Sabbath, where you can put all the things that you're supposed to be doing and so on aside, and just relax and enjoy and the good day that God has given us. So all of us would have better health if we all kept a Sabbath. 2, be physically active. We talked about that last night a little bit, and so we won't spend too much time here, but you can see this is from the U.S. Surgeon General's report on physical activity and health, some of the benefits that come from being active. And you look down there, those are all things that we would like to do. Less depression. I mean, that's one of the biggest problems in America right now. When I worked with a lot of corporations, we had over several hundred corporations that we worked with through WellSource. And we found that the number one cause of high claims, medical claims for employees, was people who were depressed. Once you're depressed, you also miss work. You seem like any health problems you get is worse. And their health claims were higher than any other group. So we tried to work with those groups to get help in that. Here's a little interesting fact that they found. One study, the researcher, Dr. Paffenbarger, figured out how many hours a person exercised at the recommended amount during his lifetime, and then how many hours or how many years added time. And he found out that for every hour you exercise, you live 2 to 3 hours longer. Is that a good investment? I'd like to go out to the bank and put in $100 and come back the next week and get $200 or $300. Well, we can get those advantages to our health, isn't it? And so sometimes people say, well, I don't have time to exercise. I say, well, that may be true, but if you do, you'll have to make time to die sooner. So you don't really gain anything, do you? You gain the most by exercising regularly and increasing your life expectancy. This is from that first big study, the Good Health Practices study. We'll just look at it quickly. Here are those this is the percent of people. You were asking me what they are sometimes, and sometimes this is an easy one. This is the percent of people who died in the three groups. This was the inactive, the moderate, and the active group. And notice that there was a big drop as they went down in each one. Now, this is for men. And those who were active, that's about a half. It's a little bit more than a half decrease in mortality, wasn't it, during the 9 years of that study. And here we see it for ladies. And what do we find for ladies? Same thing. As activity level goes up, what happens to the percent of people who died from any cause? Those are big differences again, aren't they? So ladies, it's even more important. You get even a bigger advantage by being active and increasing our life expectancy. We talked a little about steps last night. You know, you can get step counters. I have one in my watch. My son gave it to me for my birthday a few years ago, and every day I count my steps. My wife has one. We have a contest. She always wins. Come walking with us someday, and you'll have see. It's hard. I have a hard time keeping up with her. But anyway, they found that they just divided people into how many steps they counted. Here's those who got less than 7,000, and we're finding that about 7,000 or 8,000 for seniors and so on is a good goal to work towards. If you're younger, you might want to work towards 8,000 or 10,000 steps a day. But notice the difference in mortality. That's a little simple little thing. So if you want a goal that puts you in this category, 3/4 of a less risk of dying in the next, how many years? 7 to 10? No. 10 or 11 years? Or are you going to be in this group? And if you want to be in this group, what do you have to do? How many steps a day? Yeah, 7,000 or 8,000 a day or more. Okay, so take that as a little goal. That's what we do in our family, and it's fun to work towards. And we don't always make it. And some days, last week she had 19,000 steps. I think that's the day she washed all the windows around the house. Plus the 2 or 3 mile walk we go on. Next one is choosing healthy foods. We found in all of the studies that people who ate more healthily lived longer and had better health. And the main goals that they found was that those who primarily chose whole plant-based foods had the best results on longevity and less disease. They're high in nutrients. They're high in fiber. We know that that's good for us. They have high levels of antioxidants that kind of protect the body from oxidative stress that we're all under. Those are the things that kind of make us age sooner. And so they help us to live longer. They're free of cholesterol. They're low in saturated fat and sodium and calories. Those are the negative things that cause problems for us. They're best in preventing disease, and we'll look at some of those studies this afternoon in more detail. And they're also best for preventing weight gain. So there was a group in the United States, that a whole group of doctors, a whole group of organizations, probably several hundred people, that said, let's look at all the underlying causes of early prematurity in the United States and see what's causing people to die. Now, you can look at the charts and see, well, heart disease is number 1 and cancer is number 2 and, on down the road. But what's the causes of the heart disease and what's the causes of the cancer and the diabetes and Alzheimer's disease and so on? So they looked at the underlying causes, and they found that poor diet was the greatest cause of early death in the United States. And that's published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, so all the doctors should know.
So it's true then. You are what you eat.
You are what you eat. You live, what you choose to eat determines how long we live. So that's very interesting. That's why we're taking a whole time here later on to talk about that, and we'll look at some of the other things there too, of course. So here's what Harvard came up at the end of their study. These are their recommendations for healthy eating. I put this up because it's not Loma Linda University where I graduated from, because they're largely vegetarians and so on. So let's look at an unbiased group. And they said, and this is quoting right from their webpage, it says, we recommend eating mostly vegetables, fruit, whole grains, healthy fats, and healthy proteins. Okay? And then down below that, it says we also suggest drinking water instead of sugary vegetables, not vegetables, beverages. I don't know about any sugary vegetables, do you? And it's also important, to stay active and maintain a healthy weight. So that was kind of their statement. After all of that, you boil it down into just a paragraph or two. So that's the kind of diet that they're recommending. This is for all Americans. It's not just, a few people. But this is what everybody that followed these guidelines would do much better. In that particular large study, they looked at the number of servings of fruits and vegetables people were eating per day. And by the way, if you go into the Bible and you read in Genesis, very first book of the Bible, first chapter of the Bible, it tells what God intended for people to eat. And what does it say? Exactly the same thing that Harvard said. Almost exactly. Basically the plants, the plant foods, and the trees and so on that produce the foods. And the grass was designed for the animals. I'm glad they got that straight. I wouldn't want to eat grass. All right, so here's you can see, and they just simply measured how many servings of fruits and vegetables they ate per day, and it goes up. And notice up here, 7 plus. That's a lot, isn't it? Okay, but what happened to mortality from any cause? Every time they ate more fruits and vegetables in their diet, what it says in Genesis is what God intended for us to eat is more of these kinds of plant-based foods. What happens to mortality? Goes down every time you add more. So that's pretty significant, isn't it? God knew what he was talking about. So this is the plate that has come up. This is what Harvard University has made for their plate. As you know, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has a similar one. It's almost the same recommendations. And this is what they're recommending that all people in America eat. And notice they say that half of every plate of every meal should be what? Why? Because when you eat more of those, you live longer. And you have less heart disease and less cancer and less diabetes. So think about that. It's a nice little thing to think about when you're planning, when you got your plate on your food. Do you have at least half of that, fruits and vegetables? Now, when you eat out at the restaurant, what do you get for most average people? Get a big steak and maybe a little tiny vegetable, which a lot of people don't even eat. Yeah, maybe a baked potato or whatever, or fried potatoes with it. So then a fourth of your plate should be whole grains, and you can see the rest of their recommendations here on grains. And then healthy proteins. And what do they say for healthy proteins? Choose fish or poultry. Those are less of a problem than red meat. It's the red meat that seems to be most dangerous, and particularly processed meats. If you're going to use meat, these would be the healthier ones. And then beans. You like beans? We eat a lot of beans in our house. We have lentils and garbanzos and soybeans and brown beans and white beans and Maricopa beans and there's all kinds. And we have fun choosing different kinds and putting things in them. We like to put kale and carrots and all kinds of things in with them, make it more interesting. So, and then that makes a good meal. And then water, how much do they recommend up here? Doesn't say how many, but we usually recommend 5 to 8 glasses a day. And if you use oils or fats in your diet, the vegetable oils are more protective to your health than the solid fats. And then, of course, stay active. So a real nice little thing that you can use for guidelines in living healthfully. Goal number 4, maintain a healthy weight. That's something that most of us in America struggle on. That's something I have to work on. I come from a heavy family. That's a euphemism for a fat family. My mother was over 200 pounds, and she was about that tall. My father was way over 200 pounds, and he was about my height. He was taller than I was. No, he was 5'10.5" is what he always told me. That was when he was young. But he was heavy. And then my sister, who is the oldest one in the family, I call her pleasantly plump. She's not skinny, but she does pretty well. But she's not here, so I can get away with that. And then my oldest brother, he got up to about 300 pounds. And the brother that was next to me, he got up to 460 pounds. So we come from a fat family. I would come home from college, and my mother would give me a hug, and she says, "You're not eating enough. I can feel your ribs." I says, "Mom, you're supposed to be able to feel your ribs." Well, we were raised in different cultures, aren't we, in different times, and I still work with that. But most of us have to work on our weights. But it is a factor. And what they found is probably the easiest way is to measure your girth. And if you have 40 inches and above, you're in the high-risk category. And if you're 38 inches or under, or actually under 38 inches, that's the healthiest range. They have the lowest mortality. And when it gets over 40, that's high. For women, under 35 inches is what's recommended for best health. And if it gets actually under 33, and if it gets to be 35 and above, then that's the high-risk category. High risk particularly for diabetes, heart disease, stroke, high blood pressure, high blood glucose, all of those kinds of things that's damaging to our health. So, but our goal is to be healthy, not skinny, right? In fact, we find that if you get too low on the weight scale, you know what happens to mortality? It goes up. And if you get real skinny, your mortality is higher than the person who's obese. So there's the golden mean. We may look at a graph on that in a minute. So we don't recommend dieting, which is you go on an extreme diet and you just eat grapefruit or whatever it is for a while and lose weight real fast. And when you lose a lot of that weight real fast, where's it coming from? A lot of it's coming from muscles, and you don't want to lose that. So what we recommend rather is a good eating plan, healthy plan, and follow that rather than going on extreme diets. Limiting refined and highly processed foods. We'll look at a study on that in just a moment. Very, very important. Probably would take care of the problem if we all did that right there. Choose primarily whole plant-based foods. Although a lot of studies show that people who do that weigh significantly less, about 20 to 30 pounds less than those who don't follow a plant-based diet. Being active, of course, as you exercise, you're burning up those calories, aren't you? And get adequate sleep. We already mentioned that as being helpful. And a balanced life so we're not always stressed out, which seems to be associated with weight gain too. Now here's a very important study, and it takes a little explaining. It was done by Aerobic Research Center in Dallas, Texas, where they took 25,000 people, and put them on a treadmill, tested them to see how fit they were. That way how you determine how much exercise they're getting regularly. And they divided people into two groups, those who were fit and unfit. Okay? And then they looked at their weight. Now here's, let's just take, let's just take the blue group. The blue group is the unfit group to start with. And so here's the unfit group and the number that was in normal weight. And then if they were not exercising regularly, the weight went up as they were in the overweight category. This is mortality, I should say. Mortality went up. And then if they were in the obese category, it went up even further, didn't it? So about 3 times the mortality as the person who's exercising at a normal weight. But here's my point. If you're not exercising and your weight goes up, your risk goes up very quickly, doesn't it? Now here's the yellow people. Here's the ones who are exercising regularly, but of normal weight, people who are exercising regularly who are overweight, and people who are exercising regularly are obese. And what happens to the risk of dying?
Pretty much the same.
There's not much difference, is there? So we always tell people when we're working with large corporations, you have 2 choices. You can get skinny or you can be fit. Either way, significantly reduces your mortality. And for a lot of people, they have a really hard time getting down into the recommended normal weight range, myself included. But that's why I like to get exercise regularly on a daily basis, because it helps to counteract the risk of high blood pressure, high blood glucose, and so on. It counteracts all of that from people being sedentary and overweight. So that's kind of good news, isn't it? We either can lose the weight or maintain a healthy weight, or if we're overweight and we can't get down, exercise regularly, and it reduces most of the risk. All right. Now, here's an interesting study that's looking at how much processed foods we eat in relationship to weight gain. So they took subjects and randomized to eat into 2 groups, to either eat ultra-processed or unprocessed foods for 2 weeks. Now, what are ultra-processed foods? That's the things that come in packages. So I put a little list of things up here. Mostly in the ultra-processed foods, they add a lot of fats and sugars and salt, don't they, for one thing. Here's a little picture that kind of helps define it too. The refined foods, like the white breads and the cookies and the chips and all of those kinds of things, and the packaged foods, they've been highly processed, okay? In that process, they take out a lot of the fiber, a lot of the nutrients, put back a lot of other things we don't need, especially sugars and fats and so on. Or you can look at the picture here, and it's very clear what minimally processed foods are. This is kind of that picture of talking about whole grains and fruits and nuts and vegetables and legumes and so on, and eating that group. So here's what happened then after the 2 weeks. First of all, here's those eating the ultra-processed foods, and they measured how many calories they were eating per day. They told each group, you eat as much as you want. And they just laid it out there, and people helped themselves, ate as much as they want. Then they calculated how many calories they were eating, and noticed that those who chose to eat the ultra-processed foods, compared to when they were on the processed foods, unprocessed foods, their calories were about 500 calories more per day. Now, what happens if you eat 500 calories more per day than you need? It's got to go somewhere. It ends up around our middle, doesn't it? And so we gain weight. And why? Because they're eating the wrong kinds of foods. And so that's exactly what they found here. Here's both groups. And when they started, they looked at their weight and then the days on the diet. And if they were on the ultra-processed foods, what happened to their weight? Steadily went up, didn't it? And then those people who were on the unprocessed foods, what we call whole foods, notice that their weights went down. So that gives us a clue. If we want to control our weight, what do we need to do?
Natural foods.
Eat natural foods, unprocessed, the way the good Lord made them, as much as possible. Okay? It's okay to cook your beans. That's minimally processed. But and to bake some good whole grain breads and those kinds of things. But it's the refining of foods we need to be careful of. This was a study looking at youth and what percentage of their calories came from processed foods. And notice that over time, from just about 20 years ago, what happened to the percentage of their calories that came from processed foods? And what has happened to the weight of our youth in the last 20 years? Gone up. I was down in Australia not too long ago doing health programs for churches down there. And they told me, they says, we have the record of the highest number of youth, adolescents, teenagers that are overweight of any country in the world. So it's not just the United States, is it? And these are trends that are happening. And as food patterns change in other countries, they're seeing the same results worldwide.
Is part of that because of the increase in all these processed foods of palm oils?
Palm oil is a common fat that's added to almost all processed foods. And the reason is that it's saturated fat, and it can sit on the shelf for 2 or 3 years and not turn rancid. If you use a healthy plant fat, it will turn rancid, and they can't get the shelf life. And so these are things that happen in the processed foods. Again, if you eat the natural foods that the Lord made, you can help prevent that. Is that the same thing, or is that another one? I hit the wrong button. Okay, let's move to another area. How about mental health? Does that affect our longevity? In that first study, the Alameda County study, they asked people how happy they were. Very happy, pretty happy, not too happy. It's a simple question, isn't it? And they found that that was the second best predictor of how long people lived in that study. What do you suppose was first? Level of physical activity. Exercise was the best predictor of longevity, but right after that was the section on mental health. Are you happy or are you unhappy? If you're unhappy, bad things happen to our physiology as well as a lot of other things in our life. And so we need to be happy. The Lord intended for us to be happy, didn't He? And so there's a lot of life's simple pleasures that we can eat. Good food that the Lord intended for us to eat is fun, isn't it? Having friends and meeting with them and doing things together. Enjoyable music, a walk in the park, a good laugh with a friend, and so on. These are all things that, are good for our health, and we need to be doing them. God wants us to be happy. He doesn't want us to be long-faced, sour Christians. He wants us to be happy Christians. As Christians, shouldn't we be the happiest people in the world?
Yes.
I mean, God has forgiven us our sins, and if we trust in Him, He's promised us eternal life. And that's right. We've got a lot to look forward to, don't we? So we should be happy, and when we're happy, we live longer. And here's the results. Here's the actual graphs of mortality, again, just like in the rest of them. And again, here we're looking at, this is time its mortality rates for all causes of death per 100 people. So here's the men in blue. Here's the ones that said they weren't very happy. And there's the ones that said they were happy. And look at the difference in mortality. Does it make a difference?
Yes.
That's a huge difference, isn't it? Just as much as exercising and eating the right foods and so on. So we need to have a good mental outlook. And here's for ladies. Oh, look at that difference. Threefold difference in mortality. So it's important to be happy. I like this little proverb, probably written by Solomon years ago. A merry heart doeth good like what? Medicine. Okay, you want a good, cheap medicine? Just begin to look at the happy things in life and enjoy life a little more. But a broken spirit does what? Dries the bones. Now, how do you feel when you have dry bones? Another new version says, saps your strength. Not good, is it? So that was clear back in Solomon's time. Good advice, wasn't it? So there's another study done on optimism and pessimism. Now, an optimist, when he sees a half a glass of water, what does he see? It's half full. A pessimist, when he sees the same glass, what does he say? It's half empty. You get the idea there. Someone is always looking for the good things. Somebody's always pointing out the bad things in life. And so they did a test. They used the MMPI. I always have to struggle with that a little bit. Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. Which, if you're in the psychology field like my wife is, she has her master's degree in psychology and counseling. And they take these tests and they can tell things about your personality. And you tend to be mostly an optimist or a pessimist. And so they divided these people into these groups, and then they waited how long? 30 years, and then looked at mortality rates. And what they found, that this is how long the optimists lived, or their mortality rate, I guess we could say. And then as they began to become pessimists, what happened to their mortality? It went up. And if you tend to be about both, part optimist and part pessimist, then your mortality was right in between. Does it make a difference in how we think and how we look towards life and how we judge things in life? Are always looking for good things in life? If we do, we tend to find more of them, don't we? If you're always going to sure that everything bad is going to happen to you, what happens? We fulfill our own destinies, don't we? Here's another study, very interesting. This is 70,000 people over 10 years. Again, they divided them between, in their optimism score, blue is the low optimist, so they were the pessimist, in other words, and the red and the high. And look, here's the pessimist and here's the optimist, and this is for heart disease. It's important to keep your heart healthy. Don't hear much about this, do you? But your outlook on life is important. For stroke risk, for respiratory disease, for infections, for cancer, any cause of death. Is it important to have good mental health and try to be optimistic instead of always pessimistic? Makes a big difference, doesn't it? Something to think about. I like this verse in Philippians 4:13. I believe we have this one in our house. My wife likes to collect these little sayings and puts them in little plaques, and we put them on the wall. Good to remind us. But I can do all things through what? Through Christ which strengthens me. So no matter what the problems, we can give it to God, have faith in Him, He'll help us through. And if we can look back in our life when we've gone through hard times, if we've had the right attitude, sometimes it's been a good learning experience for us, hasn't it? And so we need to remember that. And then this one in Romans 8:28. We know that in all things God works for what? For good of those who love Him. So even if we go through hard times, there's good things that can come out of that if we have the right attitude. And then I like this one from Jeremiah. I know the thoughts that I have towards you, says the Lord, thoughts of peace, not of evil, to give you a future and a hope. God wants us to be hopeful. He wants us to be happy. He wants us to look for the good things in life, to trust Him through the difficult times, and we will actually do better and live longer. We're going to have to go quick here. We've got 5 minutes to finish up. Goal number 6, develop supportive social ties. We are social creatures. And we heard today in our Bible study class, one of the worst things you can do is what? Isolate people. And that's one of even the worst kinds of punishment. If we want to punish people really bad, we put them in prison. If they've been bad in prison, what do? Yep, that's the worst thing we can do to people, and it's a very horrible punishment. But what we find is that if we develop our social ties and our relationship with other people, we'll be physically healthier too. And so they had 4 indicators. Were they married or not? That's a good social relationship, isn't it? My wife is my best friend.
Sometimes it's great.
Sometimes it's good. She's pretty sharp, isn't she? She keeps me on my toes here.
Her wisdom speaks.
Yeah, okay. But generally, that's a good one. And people who are married live longer, the statistics show, overall. If you have regular contact with family and friends, they just ask these on the questionnaire. Do you attend to a church regularly? That's a good social place to meet people and make friends. We've enjoyed coming here and joining the church just a year ago, and getting to know you folks has been very enjoyable, and it's a nice way to have social activities. And are you a member of a social group or club? And then they followed again, as they always do in these studies, who lived and who died. And so here we see mortality rates again, shown on the list over here. And here's the people who had high social skills. They got 4. They met all 4 of those criteria we just looked at. And this was their mortality level. And then in men who had low, they didn't have any or maybe only one of those. Look at the difference in mortality. And for women, even higher. Women tend to be more social, and men, I think, have higher social needs. And if they don't have it, mortalities were 2 to 3 times higher over that 10-year study. So what does that tell us about another aspect of our life? If we want to be healthy and happy and live a long time, we need to what? We need to have friends. We need to meet with people. We don't want to pull apart. Contact our family. Talk with people. I don't have as much contact as I used to. I used to work with groups every day like this. And I'm retired now. So I made a list at home, and I've got it in my Bible. All the people that I should be calling every week or two and talking with and encouraging and just maintain that social contact and so on. It's good for our health. Helps us to live longer.
You can't substitute all of the, things you can do on social media. No, that's not the same.
Yes.
You can't. That doesn't work.
It's not the same as face-to-face.
No.
It's not the same as coming up to someone and give them a big hug and visiting and eye-to-eye contact and all those changes that take place, isn't it?
When we were isolated, and then during COVID, we weren't allowed to give people hugs.
That's right. And what happened to the mental problems in the United States during that time? It skyrocketed, didn't it? And suicides skyrocketed and so on.
Especially with young people.
Yes.
They were this
Yeah.
frightened them like nobody's business.
So I'd like to encourage church members. Do we have any members that are lonely, that can't come to church and so on? And would they be helped by us going to visit or calling them on the phone and making some contact with them and so on? We need to look for those kind of people in our church and in our community and on our streets and encourage social interaction. It's good for us physically and mentally. How about a faith fellowship? Research has shown us that people who go to church and so on, they experience forgiveness and the comfort, and they find hope and peace and direction and meaning in their life, fulfillment, assurance of eternal life. That's again why I say we should be the happiest people, is because we have a lot of things to look forward to. And I love this verse. God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have what kind of life? Not only abundant life here, but eternal life. I was in Romania doing a series of health programs. We went over for 2 weeks in one of their cities over there, and they gave us the city hall. We had a good turnout for the whole town. And we showed the same kinds of things in Romania. We had to use a translator. But one lady we were going through, and I said, if you exercise, you'll live this much longer, and if you eat better, you'll live this much longer. And finally she raised her hand, and she says, "Doctor, how do you live forever?" And I said, "I'm glad you asked." And we talked about this verse right here, and our hope and love and giving our heart to Jesus Christ. We not only have a good life here and live long, but we've got a chance to live forever, don't we?
Amen.
And so, anyway, we had a good time there in Romania. Here's a study that shows that if you go to church regularly, you live longer. This is for the pastor. You want to pay close attention to this one, Pastor. And you can share this information with all your members. They studied 2,000 people aged 55 and up to see what were the best factors for predicting longevity, just like all of these other studies. And here's what they found after 5 years, that the most significant factor practiced predicting who was still alive at the end of the study was attending religious services regularly.
Amen.
Isn't that good? So there's advantages, aren't there? And I've always told people you won't be hurt by going to church. It's a good way to make friends and to associate with people and learn principles and things that help you to have a better life. And now you know you'll live longer. Well, I'm going to go through these very quickly because we're out of time. But we certainly know smoking isn't good for us, is it? And it says the average person who dies from smoking loses about 10 years to your life. It's up there somewhere. Here it is. 480,000 a year. That's a huge number, isn't it? And 1,300 deaths every day in the United States caused by smoking. So helping people not to start. By the way, learning some things here is important, but I want to emphasize you are all health educators. You have influence over family members and children and grandchildren and friends. And share this information with other people. It's information that can help save their lives and encourage them to make these changes. Drug abuse. We hear a lot about that on the news today. What is it? 107,000 people this year died from drug abuse. Twice the number of young men that was killed in the Vietnam War every year just due to drugs. Is it important? We need to deal with these issues, don't we? And hardly ever hear much being done about them. Alcohol even kills more people, about 140,000 per year. And so we need to be careful that a lot of people everybody who starts to drink thinks they're going to be a moderate drinker. But life goes on and they begin to drink more and more until thousands and thousands of people have problems with it. So we can see here, alcohol is responsible. This is taken from the Institute for Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism from the National Institutes of Health. 40% of all deaths from burns, 50% of all drownings, 30% of all suicides, and you can see the list going down through there. Half of all homicides, a third of all automobile accidents is caused by alcohol. It affects our thinking, doesn't it? And we make wrong choices and bad decisions and do things we wouldn't under normal conditions. So from my perspective, the safest course is not to use any. Here's the World Health Organization is coming out, and everybody now in the new research on alcohol is saying even moderate level drinking is not good for our health. It says even small amounts of alcohol are detrimental to human health. This is the World Health Organization saying it. Alcohol is a toxic, psychoactive, and dependence-producing substance. It's a group 1 carcinogen, similar to smoking and radiation and asbestos. Alcohol causes at least 7 cancers. And here's their final statement. It says, no level of alcohol consumption is safe for our health. And so that's one thing. I'm thankful in our church I grew up with that kind of guidelines to help encourage to stay away from that. And that last one here, goal number 8, is to get regular medical care. Even if we do everything right, what can happen? You can still get sick. You can still have a heart attack or have a heart problem. Fall down and get hurt, break a hip. And so we need good medical care too. And if you go to your doctors regularly, they'll do preventive exams, can find things early, find cancers that might be at its early stages that's treatable and so on, get good advice on what to do things. So for good wellness, you want to practice the good lifestyle practices you can on one hand, get regular good medical care with that, then you have the best possible solution for having a good, healthy life. So this is just a quick summary. Following healthy lifestyles add years to our life. You can see the difference here. I like the last one here. Enjoyed a level of health equivalent to someone 20 to 30 years younger if they were living healthfully. So it's not only the length of time, it's the quality of time, isn't it? And I like this verse from the Bible, 1 Thessalonians 5:23 and 24. Now may the God of peace himself sanctify you completely, and may your whole spirit and soul and what? And body. God's interested in our physical health too, isn't he? Be kept blameless to the coming of our Lord. And then he says, who calls us is faithful will surely do it. And so God helps us in making these changes, don't we? If we want to make changes in our spiritual life, we ask for help. If we want to make changes in our physical health, we need to ask God for help there too, doesn't he? And then over time, he helps us to make those changes, to live the abundant life that God wants us to have. All right, well, it's time for lunch. I'm 5 minutes over. I'm sorry about that. Oh, my wife says, why don't you do that part?
Oh, Andrea.
We brought some good, healthy cookbooks along, and just kind of as a little prize for those who come.
Prize, and Andrea got it today. You're welcome.
She is our longest-lived person, I think, here today. And certainly has been an active interest and participator in our program. All right, well, we'll have some lunch coming up. And then afterwards, we'll get into nutrition and specifics. And after that, we'll be a little more relaxed on time. You can ask more questions and things if you'd like. I do have a master's degree in nutrition, too, and worked as a dietitian for a few years and done a lot of that. And so I found that healthy eating is one of the main pillars of good health. And so I've always enjoyed about good nutrition. Well, why don't we just stand and we'll have a closing prayer, and then we'll be ready for lunch. And fortunately, the ladies here have put together a nice lunch for us, a good healthy lunch, and it'll be a good time for social activity together too. Heavenly Father, again, we want to thank you for the wonderful bodies you've created for us and the information that you have been able to shed on our church and our lives of healthy living for many years. Help to see them as a message of love, a love letter to us, to help us to be able to prevent many of the serious problems that other people experience as we choose to live healthy lives. Be with each person here. Give them strength, give them courage, give them knowledge, give them wisdom, that we can make healthy choices for you. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. The foods that keeps us in good health. All right, let's get started here. Good food builds healthy bodies. Some of you here may be carpenters. And if you go out to build a house, and they bring you old twisted boards with lots of knot holes and stuff in them, and inferior material, what kind of a house are you going to build? A crooked house. Jesus talked about that, didn't he? Building a house on the sand and one on the rocks. Good solid foundation and all. It's the same with our bodies. If we want our bodies to have good health, what do we have to put into it? Good material. And if we have junk food, we turn up with what kind of bodies? They're not as healthy as they should be. So viruses come along, germs come along, and what happens? We get sick, and we get diseases, and we can't perform as well. And the bodies wear out sooner because they're not in good health. So putting good material in is foundation for good health. We need calcium for strong bones. There's just a few examples. We need magnesium for heart health and muscle contraction. If you don't have these things, they just don't work properly. You can actually, a person can have have weak bones, have bones that hold us up. But you put much strain on them and they fracture. If you fall, they fracture. They're weak. And so that's the problem. We need protein for muscles and for our hair and for our skin, even our brain and organs are mostly made out of protein, aren't they? And even our bones. Have you ever done that little trick? My mother used to do that. She loved to eat chicken. And they have a breastbone in the middle. And it comes out with the two pieces. And then you pull on it. Do you ever do that little thing? And then whoever gets the wishbone, whoever gets the biggest piece, I think, got to make the wish. One of my favorite things was to take that wishbone and put it into a dish and pour a little vinegar on it. Vinegar has an acid in it.
Makes it rubber.
And it turns out like rubber, doesn't it? In just a few minutes, it leaches out all the calcium. And it looks the same, but it's just like a piece of rubber. It's just soft. And that's the way our bones are. You know, they're made out of protein, but then we put the calcium and other things in it and makes it hard and makes them functional. And I'm just going to mention here, the protein in our body, most of our body is made out of protein. And all that protein in our body is continually being replaced. In our muscles, about twice a year, all the protein is replaced in our muscles. And in our organs, some of them are even faster than that, kidneys and so on, about every 180 days too. And the ones that take the longest are the bones. It takes about 7 years to replace all the the protein in the bones. And our brain is mostly protein. And every 4 or 5 years, all the protein in our brain is completely replaced. So if we're putting poor material in, when it replaces it, what's going to happen? It's just not going to work right well, is it? So if we want to stay healthy and well throughout a lifetime, when the body is trying to repair itself, we need to continue to provide it for everything that we need. What is
a fatty acid that was on there?
Oh, I didn't see one.
Yeah, it was on.
Let me go back. Fatty acids. Okay. That's a fancy name for fat. In chemistry, biochemistry, we call them acids because they have a COOH complex on the end, and they have kind of a chemical formula for that. But an example would be olives. There's fatty acids in olives and anything that has fat in it. The dressing that was on our salad today, and then avocados. And they have different kinds of fatty acids. They're not all the same. So the primary fat in avocados, for example, is oleic acid. Same in olives. And then in the dressing, they probably had soy oil or canola oil. Those are the two most common ones in salad dressings. And they're high in polyunsaturated fats. And they're probably linoleic and alpha-linolenic and some of those. And they all have different names and they have different functions. But the fats are very important. Did you ever wonder what keeps your body? We're 60% water. But what holds the water on the inside? Wasn't it just kind of drain out and make a big puddle on the floor? It's because these fatty acids there's what we call a bilipid layer around every cell, and they hold the water in because water and fat doesn't mix, does it?
No.
So the fat makes it waterproof so that we're able to maintain that water solution inside the cells and inside the body without it leaking out.
So these totally non-fat programs are no good?
You need healthy fats. In fact, some of them are called essential fatty acids. Two kinds that are essential are called linoleic and alpha-linolenic. We might get into that a little. And you have to have those in your diet or you can't live. And some of the reasons is because they make other important things. You see up there, hormones, and important for the nerves. All the nerves are surrounded by fat. That's what keeps them from shorting out. That's the insulation around them. Brain cells, very important. We have more fat in our brain than most places. So, they're very important. All of these things are essential, and we need to get them in our diet. Now, the neat thing is when we eat the food the way the Lord made it, it's packaged in those foods automatically. And it's the right kinds of fats. It's healthy fats. So we have a whole hour lecture just on fats. Maybe someday we can do that. They are fascinating. All right. Let's move along here. Let me see if my little thing works here. It also provides energy, doesn't it? Every thought that we do, every creative thing that we do, all depends upon the energy that comes from our food. And to have good energy, we need to put the right kinds of food in. Our energy comes primarily from carbohydrate, and about 55 to 60% of our calories should come from carbohydrate because that produces the energy. There's also a certain amount of energy in fat, but the protein is used primarily for building and structures in the body. And if there's some left over that the body doesn't need, then it can break it down and make energy out of that too. But it's primarily for building the body. So making healthy food choices is important. And this is from Harvard Nutrition again. And they just list some of the things. Good nutrition helps prevent these serious problems. So when you look at heart disease and stroke and cancer and diabetes, Alzheimer's disease and even infectious disease, you can see nutrition plays a vital role with all of these critical things. And that's why poor nutrition is, we saw that graph, is the leading cause of early mortality in the United States because people don't do that. And so they have all of these problems. We mentioned that in that scientific report where they were looking at the underlying causes of disease, and they found 10 nutrition factors that were predictors of good health and a longer life. And so that's what we're going to get into now, are those specific 10 factors. So here's that factor, or that graph showing that nutrition, poor nutrition, the leading cause of premature death in the United States. 675,000 people a year die, it's estimated, from poor nutrition. And this is that original study. And here are the 10 factors. So we'll just mention them quickly, and you might want to mentally, you can count on your fingers because there's 10 of them. How many of these do you meet? And so if you eat at least 2 to 4 servings of fruit a day, they got 1 point. And if they ate at least 3 to 5 servings of vegetables daily, they got a point. 3 to 4 servings of whole grains, be like oatmeal or 100% whole grain bread, those kinds of things. Those who limited their sugar-sweetened beverages to no more than once per week, that's pretty strict there. Eating nuts and seeds most every day, 5 to 7 servings per week. Seldom or never eating red meat. This is from, see, it's in the journal Circulation. This is a journal that goes to all the cardiologists and so on in the United States. These are the things that they're finding that were predictors of good health. Eating at least 1 to 2 servings of legumes. What's a legume? Beans, peas, lentils, garbanzos, soybeans, those kinds of things. Using olive oil or other healthy vegetable oils in place of solid fats. Butter, hard stick margarine, shortening, lard, those kinds of things. So you see, you have to have those healthy fats in your diet too to have good health. We'll show a little study on olive oil that's quite interesting. That was the only kind of fat they had in Jesus' day, other than fat from meats. But they had olive oil, and they used a lot of that. Jesus even did a miracle on olive oil one time, didn't he? For the widow. And she ran out of food, and he made meal and olive oil and gave it to her diet. So some people think you shouldn't eat any fat, but fat is healthy for us. We just need the right kinds. Number 9, eating fish once or more per week, or consuming other sources of EPA and DHA fat. Now, maybe you've heard of those terms or not, I don't know. What does fish have in it? Fish oil. It has these fatty acids, omega-3s, very good. And the names of them, eicosapentaenoic, that's the EPA, and docosahexaenoic, the DHA, fatty acids. And there's some others too.
You get that from flaxseed oil?
No. You can get it from fish, or you can get it from algae.
Not from flax.
That's where the fish get it, eating the algae. Or you can get it as a supplement. Now, there is one omega-3 fatty acid you can get from flax. And what's the name of that one? We mentioned that one already. Do a little quiz here. That's the alpha-linolenic acid. It's called ALA. And that is an omega-3 fatty acid, the only one found in the vegetable kingdom. But it's interesting, the brain has large amounts of EPA and DHA. And you can even, one study measured the circumference of children being born of their head, and then they measured how much EPA and DHA the mother had eaten in her diet, and it was predictive of how large the head was. So we do need some. Now, the body can convert some of that ALA into these other forms of fatty acids, but it doesn't do it very well. And what we find is to have good health, if you get some of the omega-3 fatty acids, these kind up here that you can't get in a vegan diet, you have some health advantages. And I won't go into all of this. If we get into the fat lecture, we cover all of that. But there's actually studies to show that you have a little better longevity if you have some of this in your diet. So if you don't eat fish, if you eat fish, you get all you need. Jesus got his EPA from fish. Sometimes people say it's not, it's sinful to eat meat. That's not true. Otherwise, Jesus wouldn't have done it, would he? But we do, if you do want to do without it, there are other sources. And the easiest is to go to Walmart or to Costco, and you can get these kinds of fatty acids and supplement your diet with. When I go to the research things at Loma Linda, and they have these lecturers that get up and they study this, and they take a whole hour talking about the importance of these kinds of things and the research they've done and what they're finding. And I go up afterwards and I ask them, I said, now, after you did all your research, do you take a supplement? And they said, yes, the kind that has those in it. So it's good for us to have, especially these healthy kind of fats that aren't found so much in our diet today. When I did the health series in the Alaskan camp meeting a few years back, the conference president came up and said, I get all of mine from fish. He said, just finished filling up my freezer full of fresh fish. So the people in Alaska eat a lot of fish, and actually it's quite good for you. And in the Adventist Health Study, they looked at that. I'm getting off track here just a little. But they looked at Adventists who ate meat regularly, those who had a little bit of meat in their diet, and those who were lacto-vegetarians. They had no meat, but they used a little milk and eggs. Then they looked at vegans, and then they looked at a group called pesco-vegetarians. Pesco is a fancy name for fish. And those were vegetarians who had a little bit of fish. And for some diseases, the pesco-vegetarians did the best. For example, for bowel cancer, it's protective against there, and they cut their risk almost in half of the other vegetarians. And for the women, and I'm not sure why it's not the same for men, but for women, the ones that lived the longest were the pesco-vegetarians, longer than any of the others. So, but what we need to learn from it are what are they getting from those areas? And then you can get those from other sources if you want to.
Yeah, sorry, just can you remind me again? I'll just write down EPA and DHA.
Uh-huh.
The meats, just to write down.
That's in fish. Mm-hmm. And it's also in the things that the fish eat, which is the algae. And so if you go to Costco and buy a vegetarian source of EPA and DHA, it comes from the algae. Okay, we're getting a little off course here, but anyway, so their recommendation was you need some sources of those healthy fatty acids. And in number 10, limiting salt and salty foods. So those were the 10 indicators, and now let's look at the research that looks at each of these. Well, first of all, they took those 10 indicators and they added them up. How many of the 10 did you follow? Did you do the math in your head as you were watching, going through there? So there's the numbers we see down there. Those who got 0 to 1 only did 0 or 1 of those good healthy factors. There's more mortality rate on the left. Get my pointer going here. And then if they had 2 or 3 good healthy nutrition factors, this was the mortality rate, and it drops, you see. And every time they go up, the more nutrition factors they have, mortality levels come down. So all of those were good indicators, 30 to 37% decreased mortality. Now, when they did the research, you didn't have to have a real high criteria to get those points. If you did better than the average person, that's what they did in the criteria, then you got a point. But the average person doesn't do too well, right? So if they'd had higher criteria, it would have made out even significantly more improvement than those years shown there. So here's the first one. Eat more fruits and vegetables. That's what we got through doing, right? And we saw this morning, this same chart, I believe, well, we will look in a minute. But they're loaded with the kinds of things that's good for us. First of all, they're low in calories. That's why they help to keep our weight down. They have a lot of water and a lot of fiber and things, so they fill us up before we get too many calories. They're high in nutrients. When you look at all the vitamins and minerals, that's where most of them are found. It's high in dietary fiber. That's part of the carbohydrate that's not absorbed, and it goes on through in the intestine. We're finding out now that that fiber that's not absorbed is very important for our health because it feeds what we call a bio... Finish the last half for me. Can't quite hear it. Yeah. It feeds the bacteria in our intestines that keeps us healthy. Is it biodome? Biome. Biome. There, I got it. Oh, brain's not as bright as it used to be. Okay, that's our biome, and we're finding that has all kinds of effects on our health. Helps us to control how much we eat so we don't overeat and keeps our weight down, and has to do with mental health and all kinds of things we're just learning about. So it's a very active area of research right now. Okay, and then that reduces the risk for these are probably our most common health problems in the United States. And eating more fruits and vegetables is helpful for all of those. That's why our government is saying aim for at least 5 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables every day for best health. Where does that come from? It comes from the National Institutes of Health. Have you heard of the DASH diet? DASH diet? It's one that the government is recommending, good for weight loss, good for lowering your blood pressure, good for decreasing heart disease, good for preventing Alzheimer's disease. And why is it good for all of that? And diabetes. It's good for all of that because they're pushing fruits and vegetables. And that's their recommendation. It's not from Melinda even, or from the church recommendations or anybody else. It says if you want the best health, eat lots of those kind of foods, and it gives your body what it needs for being in good health. So here's just a few ones right quick. And we'll go through these kind of quickly because we've got a lot of slides to look at. Eating salads. Do you like salads? Our dinner today was kind of a salad, wasn't it? Put the brown rice on the bottom, the whole grain, put some salad on top, and all those other good toppings that were there. And but people there, they just did a study, 10,000 people for 17 years. That's quite a thorough study, isn't it? They simply asked them if they ate salads or not. They had other things too, but those who seldom ate salads, their risk of dying, and those who ate salads daily. Now that's the category I'd have to put myself because I love salads. I even have them for breakfast sometimes, about half the mornings. So if you like salads, they're good for us. And what will it do? Help you to live longer. There are all the good fresh vegetables right there. Berries are one of the other things in the fruit category that are very good for the circulation and the heart and the brain and so forth. They're very brightly colored, and that means they're very high in antioxidants. And they help to slow down the oxidative processes, help to reduce inflammation, reduce our risk of heart disease, particularly they're very effective, and also very protective to the brain and protect the brain. So here we're looking at servings of berries per week, and only 3 servings per week. And notice what happened. Risk of heart attack is cut 1/3. Now, how hard is it to eat a bowl of strawberries or raspberries or blueberries or blackberries for breakfast? Not hard at all, is it? And these are the good things the Lord has made for us, and adding those foods regularly. So after I learned this research and also the effect on the brain, we had a whole hour presentation on how it affects the brain. It was really amazing. I try to have berries every day. And they're good for us and good eating. Here's one on vegetables. This was in the Cancer Prevention Study 2, a very large study, almost 750,000 people. And in this case, we're looking at colon cancer. I had a discussion with somebody this morning as what causes colon cancer. Well, here's one indicator. Here are those who had a low intake of colon cancer and their mortality rate, and then those who had a high intake, men and women. And those are big drops. That's about a 24% drop and 38% drop. So those are big differences, aren't they? So one thing you can do to prevent colon cancer, eat more vegetables. There's a lot of other things you can do too, by the way. Don't smoke, exercise. Exercise is maybe even more protective than the other things. There's a lot of other things too. Yeah, not drinking alcohol. That's true. So here we see fruits and vegetables, and again, we looked at that this morning, and just as the number goes up, every time it goes up, there's a decrease in mortality. Cut the risk in half in this study from dying from any cause. So fruits and vegetables, that's kind of a given. We need to be eating more. How many? At least 5 servings a day is what the Food and Drug, not the Food and Drug, but the USDA recommends in their food guidelines for Americans. At least 5 a day, but you know there's hardly less than about 10% of the population that reaches even that minimum goal. But if you eat more, you even have more benefit. So that's principle number 1. Number 2, choose primarily whole grains. And again, we can see some of the reasons why. They're high in some of the things that's helpful for us to have good health. And they're have a low glycemic index. What does glycemic index mean? Are you familiar with that term? It's how fast it raises your blood sugar. And some foods are absorbed very quickly and they raise it very high. And we call those foods of high glycemic index. Others are very low. I need my water, I think. Here it is. And we'll get into that as a principle later on. And I made up a sheet for you to see all the glycemic index of various foods, and I've forgotten left at home.
So can I have you explain to them why it's better to get it in the vegetables versus buying that pill that guy advertises on TV for the fruits and vegetables? Because we always laugh at that.
Well, they may get a few vitamins and minerals and so on, but there's a lot of things you miss, primarily the fiber. They can't put all that fiber in there. The pill would be so big you couldn't eat it. So you can't, you need all of those things together. So you can't just take a pill and cure all of your problems.
So when they talk about 5 or 6 vegetables a day, what is a serving size? Is it 2 ounces?
Okay, for fruits and vegetables now, they used to use smaller servings, and now they're saying about a cup if it's fresh, 2 cups if it's a salad, but 1 cup if you're taking like raw carrots or tomatoes chopped up or whatever. That's the new serving. So they're talking about a lot. The old one was a half a cup cooked and 1 cup raw. So it's okay to use that too.
How many servings? How many servings per day?
Vegetables. They're recommending 4 to 5 for good health, and for fruits 2 to 3. That gives you your 7 to 9. And I've always said we ought to have a rule for Adventists or a goal: 7 fruits and vegetables a day for Seventh-day Adventists. Wouldn't that be a good one? You can all remember that.
And it's easier to do it, of course, when you blend it into a smoothie, and that does count.
My wife's a smoothie lover. So we had smoothies this morning and yesterday morning, and she puts greens and things in it too. So you can get 4 or 5 servings out of it.
Smoothie. Then your grain is added to it when you put the granola in it, and you can put fruit, nuts in it, and take care of that. Yeah, you can just put anything you want in it.
Now, in the United States, most people use refined grains. What's some examples of refined grains? Like white flour instead of whole wheat flour. And they take the other grains and they mill them, white rice instead of brown rice. And so 90% of the grains in America are refined. And that's a big factor for causing diabetes and these kinds of health problems. You had a comment you were going to make here.
Yes, I'm using 40 ounces a day, I think. And cancer, like when I had cancer, I couldn't even open up for a water bottle last year. My energy level was 1,000%.
Yeah.
But I do 40 ounces every other day. I think 40 ounces each day.
So if you want to pack in all those vitamins and minerals and all that good nutrients, that's an easy way to do it. Yeah. But it saves a lot of time on the chewing. There is a little principle, though, we use in dietetics that says most of the time try to chew your food rather than drink it. And the reason is because when you make it into juice, it goes down real fast and real easy. And sometimes for those who are having problems controlling our weight, we eat a lot more calories than we would otherwise. For example, if you eat a whole orange, if you tried to squeeze that, how much would it make in the glass? Not very much. So if it's a quarter of a cup, so in one glass of orange juice, you have 4 oranges. How many of you eat 4 oranges for breakfast? But how many of us would take a whole glass of orange juice, you see? So the recommendation just for weight management is it's better to chew it. There's something in the chewing that also tells the brain that you're getting fed. And when it just slips down like a liquid, it just goes whoosh. And it said, did I eat something? I'm not sure. And so it helps you to naturally eat fewer calories. Yeah, you get the fiber with it, which again is very helpful in a lot of ways. And the glycemic index is a little lower because you've got the fiber with it. Okay, so how many we're supposed to eat a day of the whole grains? About 3 servings. And the reason why is you'll see in these charts that as we go through them quickly here. So this is from Harvard's nurses study where they had about 70 to 80,000 nurses, followed them for many years. And here's those who had 1 serving of whole grains per day, their risk of a heart attack or stroke, sudden death, and those who only had, or who had 3 or more, a 30% decrease. Now, if we could decrease heart attacks and strokes in the United States by 30%, the cardiologist would be elated. That's a big change. Now, how about diabetes? That's one of our 10 leading causes of death, too. Another large, 160,000 in this one for 18 years. Here's who had 1 serving a day or less, those who had 3 or more servings per day. So that's why our government is recommending at least 3 to 4 servings of whole grains every day are very protective to our health. We have less heart disease and fewer strokes and so on. Here's the one on strokes. Here's the number of servings per day. Less than 1, 1, and 3. And what I'm always amazed at, even if you just had 1 serving a day, it's a big drop, isn't it? So whole grains are protective to our health. Now today we hear a lot about how terrible grains are. Here's the book out about grains and so on. And what you need to realize is what they're talking about is the refined grains. Refined grains are actually raise inflammation in our body. And they're not as healthy for us. But if you eat the whole grain, you have a much lower glycemic index and higher fiber and all those kinds of things. It does not raise inflammation. It's good for your health. You'll have less heart attacks and stroke and diabetes and so on. So don't throw all the grains out. Just choose the healthy ones and stay away from the highly refined ones. By the way, where do they use all that white flour? They make cookies and cakes and donuts and pastry and refined breakfast cereals and all these other things too that we have to be careful of. Yes, And as I said, 90% of the grains in America are from highly refined, and we have a big problem of diabetes and obesity and all the things that's related to that. Whole grains protect against cancer. Look at that. It's interesting. All of them are real close to about a 30% drop, isn't it? We've been looking at 27,000 people, 17 years, large studies, 28% less cancer. So these are all things that add up, don't they? And here's whole grains and total mortality of 15,000 people for 11 years. And they started with just a tenth of a serving. In other words, they ate a whole grain piece of bread maybe once every other week or something. And then a half a serving per day, and then one serving, and 1.5, and 3. By the time you're getting down to 3, total mortality was down, cut in half. I don't have the one here, I don't think, about the Adventist health study. Do I? But I've got to tell a little story about it. The Adventist health study, they divided Adventists into 3 groups. Those who used whole grains the most of the time, those who didn't use it most of the time, and those who were halfway in between. And if you compared those who used whole grains the majority of the time compared to those who hardly ever used whole grains, it did cut the risk of heart attack in half. That's within the Adventist church. And if you used both the same, it was about in the middle. So it does make a big difference. Now, when I was raised, I always ate white bread. Why did I eat white bread? That's what my dad ate. And you wanted to be, like your dad, so I ate white bread. It's the only thing that was on the table, too. Mom made white bread. She made good bread, but it was always white bread. Then I went to graduate school down to Loma Linda and went through the nutrition program. And I went through the cafeteria one day and was looking for the bread. And all they had was this old brown bread, So I called the lady over and I said, "Where's your white bread?" And she said, "Oh, it's not supposed to eat white bread. Don't you know? It's not good for you." And so I said, "Oh, well, I'll try this." So I began to eat whole grain wheat. And after a while, what do you suppose? I had a new habit, and I liked it. And it was even better than the white bread.
Then you didn't like the white bread anymore.
Didn't like the white bread anymore. It went out the door. Now, move the clock forward about 30 years. I go back to Loma Linda University for one of their updates, and I went through the cafeteria line, and what do you suppose they had? They had white bread. So I called the cook over, and I said, "Where's your brown bread?" He said, "Oh, we have some in the back room." And I said, "Quick, bring it out. Don't you know it's not good for you to eat white bread?" What had happened? We live in a culture where we eat almost all refined breads, and we get, people get used to that. And so we drift away from our principles. And so we need to be going back to those good principles. As we saw up here, it makes a big difference in all kinds of aspects of our life. So we try to have whole grains on everything that we eat. The only time we'd ever eat white bread is we were out somewhere and we living with somebody else or something, and that's all they had.
How much of the whole grain in your study, as of like the last 10 years, has become genetically modified with a higher creatinine than what God essentially created?
Well, the farmers are always looking for increasing production of grains. And they take the old ancient grains and they've worked on them until they get more and more for ones. But these studies that we're looking at here, these are all done on what we're eating day by day. So if they're getting a 30% reduction in cancer and diabetes and so on, it has benefit. Is it as good as the old ancient grains? I don't know if they've studied all of that. I haven't seen a lot of reports on that.
Yeah, we hear it's just a lot more protein.
But don't be afraid to eat the whole grains today. You will have less disease if you eat the whole grains than if you leave them out. Because if you leave them out, what else are you going to eat? You'll find something else to take its place and probably won't be as good. So it's all right to use whole grains. Oats, I think, are great. We don't eat wheat in our family because my wife's celiac disease and I'm allergic to it. So we eat quinoa, a very healthy grain. We eat a lot of oats. We eat a lot of brown rice. We eat there's other things that you can do. But in all of those, try to get the whole grain if you can. We do not have a genetically modified wheat in the United States, except as farmers just find by strains that they can grow one or the other better. But it's not a genetically modified food. There's only about 8 in the United States, and wheat is not one of them. Okay, number 3, limit sweets and sugar. How many of us like sweets and sugar? Did you love the beautiful fruit salad? Okay, now there's a sweet that's good for you, isn't it? By the way, when you do studies on diabetes, and I don't know if I've got any here or not, but you compare the natural foods like apple juice and orange juice and so on, glycemic index is much lower, and it doesn't have the same effect. So when you eat the natural fruits with the natural sugars in them, the way the Lord made them, it's not a problem. You're not going to get too much carbohydrate or too much sweets. It's only when you refine it and eat it separately, or put it into food separately, that the sugar causes a problem. So you can look up there and see some of the problems with it. It's related to a lot of our problems, heart disease even, and obesity, and diabetes especially, and even Alzheimer's disease, research on that. So we have to be careful of sweets. Notice this, right now in the United States, the average intake is estimated between 22 and 23 teaspoons of sugar per person per day. Now, I don't eat that much, so somebody else is getting my share too. But that's a lot, isn't it? If you take the teaspoons and take 22 teaspoons and make it in a pile and think that's what the average person eats a day. But when you look at it in the actual food, which we'll do in a minute here, you can see how it does. Sugar is added to a lot of foods we don't think about. See on the right-hand side there? Of course, the sweetened beverages, that's a third of all the sugar we eat comes just from sodas. And grain-based desserts, cookies and cakes and those kinds of things, and pastry and fruit drinks with a lot of sugar added, and dairy desserts, fancy name for ice cream, and candy. So it's in a lot of foods we don't think about, even ketchup and the sauces and things we use. So it's hidden in a lot of foods.
What's the difference between white sugar and like cane sugar or brown sugar?
The difference between white sugar and brown sugar, there's not a lot of difference. Nutritionally,
Is there a good sugar that you could eat? Like, say, people tell you to eat what do we buy? Cane sugar. Yeah, we buy cane sugar. Yeah, cane sugar. But I've also heard recently that is just as bad as regular white sugar.
if you do tests on glycemic index, the cane sugar and the beet sugar raise your blood sugar about the same. The one that they're kind of hard on is the corn syrup, which we use a lot of. And there's some evidence it might be a little worse. But you need to consider all sugars. Shouldn't be eating any of those very much. If you want a little bit of sweetener, take a little bit of honey and drizzle it on something, And Proverbs again says, if you like honey, don't eat too much of it. I've been enjoying Proverbs. If you want to sweeten some things, sometimes we sweeten it by putting a banana in our smoothie. See, and that gives a little sweet naturally, and it's a fruit, so it's no problem. Sometimes you can put, we make granola and we put a little apple juice in it for some of the liquid in place of water. And when our kids were little, we tried to go without sweets a lot. So we would put in dates. We'd make an ice cream. And we would take frozen bananas and frozen pineapple and frozen berries, put them in the blender with a little soy milk. And we'd throw in a date or two, make it a little extra sweeter. And it was all fruit then, wasn't it? And that's much better than adding these other artificial sugars. Now, there's several hands here. We'll take this one first and then in the back.
I was going to say, two things. I have a girlfriend who grew up near the sugarcane fields, and even just eating sugarcane rotted their teeth. And if you've ever, I don't know if they have them anymore, but in Hawaii they used to have the sugarcane mills that you could go through. And the difference between brown and white is just where you pull it off in the refinement system. Yeah.
The way they make it today is they take white sugar, they pour some sorghum or molasses on it, stir it up. There's a few more minerals, but it's negligible. I think there was a comment back here. As far as sugar is concerned? No. Organic sugar is no healthier than any other kind of sugar. Yeah. Now, I went to a conference one time. It was at a church group, and we had some real skinny presenters up there, and then me. And they were taking questions, and one really raised her hand, and she was kind of meek, and she says, I love sweets. I just love to eat sweets. He says, what can I do? And the real skinny doctor got up first, and he says, best thing to do is just never eat sweets again your entire life. You can see this poor little lady just kind of slide down in her chair, thinking, And then came my turn, and I said, well, let's just think about this for a minute. I said, who made the sweet taste buds on our tongue? God made them, didn't he? Well, what did he do that for? He wanted us to enjoy sweets, right? But what kind of sweets? Yeah, I said enjoy the fresh berries and the pineapples and all the good things like we had in our fruit salad today, all the fresh fruit. It's got sugar in it, but it's not harmful to your health. You'll live longer by eating those foods. So that's the kind of sugar we need. Now, if you use a little bit more of some other, once in a while, or you're going to celebrate birthday or whatever, but we don't have to have a birthday every day, do we? So here's what the recommendations are, and this is from the Cardiologist magazine, Circulation, and they say we should eat less than 6 teaspoons a day for women and less than 9 for men. Now, if you measure that out, that's very modest amounts.
How do you feel about artificial sweeteners?
We'll have a slide or two on those. I think we'll look at that in a minute. If I don't have them there, you remind me. They sound great, but they're not usually. Sometimes it increases your risk even more for diabetes using those than the real sugar. So here's one on sugar and risk of diabetes. And we have, 66,000 people for 14 years. That's a pretty thorough study, isn't it? And they looked at their sugar-sweetened beverages intake. If they had none, if they had moderate amounts, and if they had a high intake. A high intake was about 1 can or a little more a day of soda pop. And then look at the risk. Those are big jumps, aren't they? Just from that one source. So as your intake goes up, the risk of diabetes is directly related to that. People drinking the most sugar had 34% more likely to develop diabetes. If they had 1 can of soft drink per day, increased their total mortality from any cause by 29%. I had my niece come live with us, and she was addicted to pop. She wouldn't drink water. She'd just drink these cans of pop. And it was more than 1 can a day. And we finally told her, says, look, you need to get off of that and drink some water. She said, I've been drinking water for years. Isn't that terrible? Didn't like the taste of it. But before she lived with us for a year, before she got done, she was drinking water. Yes. Is there what kind of sugar?
Natural high fructose corn syrup.
These are soft drinks.
The soft drinks have high fructose corn syrup.
Yeah. This is just typical soft drinks. It would be glucose or sucrose primarily. It would be the sugar in these. Now, when you say naturally sugar, there's different kinds of sugars in fruits, and mostly each fruit has a whole bunch of them. They have sucrose and lactose and glucose and galactose and all kinds of sugars. If you drank like an apple juice or something? Yeah. Corn syrup is the typical sugar in soft drinks. So it's no good. If you're going to use it, small amounts occasionally. Isn't that something? 1 can of soft drink a day raises your risk for any cause of death by 29%. So we don't want to use those. I was seeing if I had one that compared it with fruit juices. I have that slide, but I cut them out so we won't keep you here all day. But they did compare orange juice, apple juice, and then all the soft drinks and so on. All the soft drinks increased the risk, including the ones that sweetened by artificial sweeteners. And it increased it more even than the regular ones. But the orange juice and the apple juice did not increase the risk for diabetes. We would still recommend you either eat the whole apple and the whole orange. But the way that the Lord made it, it's preferable to our bodies. Our bodies use it better, differently. Okay, this is just directly looking at how much sugar we eat, and sugar is percent of our calories. And you can see as it begins to go up. Now this group down here, 7% of your calories, that's where it's less than 6 teaspoons a day for women and less than 9 for men. We're using that as a starting point. And as it goes above that, every time there's an increase in sugar, your risk of dying goes up. And notice down here, when you're up here in this group, those are the people who are drinking soft drinks every day and all those kinds of things, twice the risk of dying from cardiovascular disease. So this is coming out for the doctors, telling them, tell your patients not to drink so much of this. They can double their risk of heart disease. And in this case down here, again, deaths from any cause increased by 28%. So it's not a good thing to have in our diet. And as the sugar intake goes up, mortality also goes up. Any questions about sugar? Oh, here's where you find them. Just a minute, Pastor. Notice here's how many teaspoons are in different foods. Now, if you have two small cookies, you get teaspoons. How much are you supposed to have for all day? Less than 6. A piece of cake, sponge cake, that's not a real high one, but 6 teaspoons. Just 2 scoops of ice cream, 6. A donut has 4. Look at Fruit Loops. Have you had Fruit Loops recently? 11 teaspoons in one serving. That's enough for 2 days of all the sugar you should have. And you can go down through and look at those different foods. They're all high, aren't they? Even these energy drinks have a lot of sugar in them. So we have to be careful of that. Pastor, you were going to make a comment.
Yes, so I have a question in regards to those, we're talking about intaking water. Those sweeteners, the one that make the water taste sweet, something.
Uh-huh.
Are those
Artificial.
No sugar, no nothing.
There's artificial sweeteners, and they're not good for us. You're much better to have the straight water. They taste good, but when you compare those to the people who use water, it raises the risk for certain things. If you're diabetic and you want to have something like that occasionally as a special treat, just don't use it too much. Okay, there's a question here and then back here.
So would you recommend, like, let's say I want this water sweetened a little, using like strawberries and let them soak in the water overnight?
You could do that. Fruit infusion. We had a gentleman that came up from Mexico and stayed with us one summer when I was growing up. And he would make fruit juices out of fresh berries and watermelon and all those kinds of things. And he would kind of grate them up and put them in the water and so on. And they were great. And those would be healthy for us. Or orange juice is healthy for us. Grape juice. Just have them in smaller quantities. Yes. Oh.
Speaking of water, what I've been known to do is essential oils. You have a pure essential oil that's not unadulterated. You can take citrus, peppermint, just adding a drop, to like.
And makes the water really flavorful.
Yeah, it can give you,
Good idea. There's only one artificial sweetener, and it's not really so much artificial, and it's the one my wife uses. What's the name of it?
Stevia. But you can't use
Stevia.
You can't use a whole lot of it.
But just a small amount. It comes from a leaf, stevia plant, I guess. And from the research I've seen on that, it doesn't cause any increased risk. And so she likes to use a little of that. I don't. I just like to eat straight. But that was one that I wouldn't be too concerned about.
I'm seeing a monk one that pops up. So you have to eat back on
Monk fruit? Yeah. There's a lot of things people write on that, but it's not the best. It's not a cure-all. I mean, you can't use a lot of it. You can use a little, It's a fruit. It's okay, but just it's not the one that you can make sugar out of and use large amounts of it.
What would you say about, I know we were kind of already talking about artificial sweeteners tablet. What would you say about aspartame?
Aspartame is an artificial sweetener. It's not a good one to use. I mean, you can live by it, but it's more likely to cause health problems. It's better first to learn to like the real fruits and things the Lord gave us in the first place and enjoy those.
I guess. That's what's in the diet drinks is aspartame. The diet sodas, that's why I was asking. Yeah.
And some are worse than others, aren't they? But not any of them are as good as fresh water. Okay. Now we're talking a little bit about glycemic index. There's a whole research on this where they test the food, and the way they do is they have you eat a test food first and then a certain amount of grams of carbohydrate, usually 50 grams. See how fast it raises your blood sugar level over a period of several hours, and it plots a little curve. And then they give you the next day, the same person, they give you another food, and they measure that, the same amount of carbohydrate, and see if it comes up faster or not. And that's called glycemic index. It's on a scale from 0 to over 100. The glucose, if they use glucose as the test sugar, it comes out to be 100. They set that as a norm and then compare everything to that. Glucose is a sugar that's absorbed quite quickly. Sucrose is the sugar we use the most of. It has a glycemic index of about 72, 75, somewhere in there. It's not quite as much as that. And then white bread has about exactly the same as sucrose. Or a baked potato, or French fries, or white rice, or what's the other fourth one up there? White bread. It's interesting that they raise your blood sugar about exactly the same as pure sugar. And the reason is because they take the starch out of those, and it's highly refined and it's highly processed. Remember that one we looked at this morning when you eat the ultra-fine, ultra-processed foods? Well, that's just what happens. And that food just hits the stomach and it's absorbed very, very quickly. And so when that goes up quickly, then where does the blood sugar go? When it gets real high, your pancreas says, whoa, big load of sugar coming. So it produces a large amount of insulin. Insulin is what brings it back down. And so you produce large amounts of insulin, then the blood sugar falls real quickly and even goes below fasting, and then you get real hungry, and then what do you want to do? Run down and get a big gulp, right? We had our office was on a street where there was a 7-Eleven down the street from there. And about mid-morning, you'd see all these people all heading for 7-Eleven coming back with these great big gulps. Just full of sugar. I don't know, they must have been a whole quart of that stuff. And they would drink that, and then their energy would come up for a while, and then it would drop even lower, and then have to go get another one. And so that's the bad thing about it. Also, your pancreas, after so many years of producing all these high levels and so on, pretty soon it gets worn out. And then what happens? It quits functioning, then you have to go on insulin. Yeah, so it increases the risk for diabetes. Also, as you use a lot of that, and then you usually, when that insulin level goes up and it takes all that blood sugar out of your blood, where does it put it? Out here in space somewhere? Right here. And it's called excess weight. And then when the weight goes up, then the body becomes resistant to insulin, and your pancreas has to put out more and more to get the same effect, and eventually it just wears it out, and that's when you have diabetes. So if you stay away from that cycle, then you're much less likely to have that problem in your life. That's a simple explanation of it. But anyway, we want to eat the low glycemic foods.
What was interesting on all of those 4 items was exactly what when my mother found out she was diabetic. The doctor just told her right off the bat. He says, I'm going to tell you right now, the easy way to do this, lady, if it's white, it's not all right. Don't eat it. That's right. So I asked him that when we were just going out, because his mother was diabetic too. It's white, it ain't all right.
I put these 4 up because in the Nurses' Health Study, where they had the 80,000 people they went for 10, 12, 15 years and followed, the 4 foods that was most closely related to developing diabetes in the American diet were these 4 foods. Soda pop should be up there. It is. Soft drinks, French fries, white rice, and white bread. Those were the 4 foods most likely to cause diabetes in the American diet. Now, they were very high glycemic.
What do you think about cauliflower rice? Is that a substitute for white?
Cauliflower rice, it's a vegetable, isn't it? No problem. Very low glycemic index compared to all of these things. And that's why they invented it. Okay. A lot of people can have the cauliflower rice, they can't have the other. Now, here's a study Harvard did where they took these nurses again and they looked at their glycemic load. Now, glycemic load is very similar to glycemic index. It takes the glycemic index but then multiplies it by how many grams of carbohydrate are in the food. So obviously, if you eat a great big potato that has a lot of carbohydrate or a very small potato, the glycemic load would change, wouldn't it? So it's a better indication overall of the effect of of the food that you're eating. Now, on the left side down here where it's very low, over here we have risk of developing diabetes, or heart disease, risk of developing heart disease. So down here we start at the people who have the lowest glycemic load, and these are called quintiles. These are the 20th percents. So this group of people have 20% more glycemic load in their diet, and here 20% more and 20% more. These are the 20% of the people who have the highest glycemic load in their diet. And what does it do to heart disease? Doubles the risk. So is glycemic index important? Can double your risk of a heart attack. Now, we're not doing the fat lecture today, but if we had saturated fat up here, you know where it would come? It would come about right in here, about a 30% increase in mortality. Sugar is more damaging to your heart than saturated fat. So you have to be careful of that. All right, just some examples. And here's some actual foods. And I had the whole big list. And if you really like to get it, you can email me. Or if there's a whole bunch of you, I'll email it to your pastor and he can send it out to you. Okay, here's the high glycemic foods. If they have a value of about 70 and above. Remember we said sugar is about 75 somewhere there, the regular white table sugar, not glucose, but sucrose. And so it gives you an idea. So here's white bread right up here at the top, pastry, pancakes, waffles made out of it, and so on. All the things made out of white bread, cake and cookies, they're right up there at the top. Soft drinks right up there at the top. French fries and fried potatoes. It's the starch in the potato that's quickly absorbed that causes a problem. And so if you want to eat potatoes, eat them in small amounts and don't eat them real frequently. I like a potato once in a while. But instead of eating the whole potato now, I cut it in half and we share it. So if we eat them, we just try to eat them in small amounts and eat other things that have a very low glycemic index with us, like beans. So you can see these foods here. And then a lot of the breakfast cereals, most all of the breakfast cereals are very high. Cornflakes have a glycemic index of over 100. Weren't cornflakes invented by Adventists? Dr. What was his name? Kellogg? And why is it? It's simply because it's highly refined. Now, if you eat the whole corn, like we had in our meal out here today, did you notice that you could put corn on the top or things? It has a glycemic index that's down in this category. So it's better. This is moderate. And then the very lowest ones, look up here, lentils and beans, all very low, usually in a glycemic index of about 20 to 25. Very low. So they're helpful. And studies have been done giving those to diabetics, and they're helps them to manage it quite well. Leafy vegetables and the broccoli and summer squash and all these kinds of things, very low. Even the oranges and apples and berries, all low glycemic index, even though they have natural sugars in them. Whole grain pasta or steel-cut oats. Are you familiar with steel-cut oats? It's the whole oat grain, and they cut it in about 2 or 3 times, so it's very unrefined.
What's the difference between the steel cut and the ones that...
Like the old-fashioned flakes? The old-fashioned flakes are smashed.
But they still have the same amount of nutrients.
They're the same grain, but it's just processed a little more, so when it hits the stomach, it's absorbed faster. And then if you take the quick oats, on the list I printed out, I showed quick oats are up here, and then the regular oats are kind of in here, and then the steel-cut oats are over here after they're the lowest. So if you're diabetic, that's important to know that. But for any of us who want to prevent diabetes, keep your blood sugars low. That's helpful too.
And steel-cut oats are actually so much better than oatmeal. I can't emphasize that more. When you go to these really kind of cool places to go skiing or whatever, they sell you steel-cut oats, and you'll wait 20 minutes for it. And they'll tell you that because it takes that long to cook it. But if you like nuts and you like that texture, you will like steel-cut oats.
It's chewy.
It's chewier.
We make them what we do with, like, put it in the soy milk and then sit it in the refrigerator overnight, and we eat them that way.
Uh-huh.
We typically don't like
So they soak it up. Sure.
that's how we do it.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I might mention bread here too. You don't see the list over here. Do we see bread? Where's whole wheat bread? Whole wheat bread is just the line below white bread. You'd think it would be good. But what happens is they take that grain and they grind it real fine. And even though it still has the extra fiber and all the minerals and all those things, it's good for us and it's better in that sense. But for glycemic index, it's about the same. White bread's about 75, whole wheat bread's 74. Both high glycemic indexes. Now, if you want a low glycemic bread, you have to look for bread that is coarsely ground and is kind of in chunks again. And probably the best example of that would be Ezekiel bread. Have you ever heard of Ezekiel bread? It's made on the recipe taken out of the Bible from Ezekiel 4:9, I think it is, if I remember right. And it says, put in a jar all these things, all the different kinds of grains, and then grind them up and make your bread out of it. And so they do that, and you can buy it. I saw it in Walmart this week, in the frozen fruits section, in the frozen lockers. And it's a very coarse grain. When you eat it, it's not real fine. Whole wheat bread in the stores is really finely ground up. It's just about the same texture as white bread. But you get the real coarse texture. When it gets into the stomach to be digested, it can't absorb it so quick. It takes a while to break it down. And when it does that, it's a lower glycemic index, and it's better for us. Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say also on the whole oats are tasty, and so are blueberries. And my mom used to just put boiling water on them and stick them in the oven overnight when the old gas piles.
Uh-huh.
And they would be whole and chewy.
Yeah. And my mom did that with whole wheat, too.
Yeah.
And it would soak it up and be nice and chewy, and it has a low glycemic index. So, yeah, these whole grains are good for us. Just be careful about the grinding. And gets it a real fine flour, and then it absorbs more quickly. And here, eating more high-fiber foods is principle number 4. People who had a higher fiber food intake had lower mortalities. And you can see all the different kinds of diseases and things that it can help prevent down here. And here's the reasons why. Now, where is fiber found?
Fruits and vegetables. And grains.
Only in plant-based foods, number 1. Okay? There's not any in animal foods. And usually the whole grains and beans and legumes and some in the vegetables and some in the fruit. They're not as high as those other two. The highest fiber of anything are beans and legumes. You get maybe 2 to 3 or 4 grams in a serving of whole grains. In vegetables, you get about 2 to 2.5 to 3 grams of fiber. Fruits, you get about 1.5 to 2, and in a small serving of legumes, you get about 8 to 10. And so if you want to add fiber, adding the legumes boosts it up very well. Nuts, by the way, are also a good source.
So how many servings of you want of the bases on a daily basis?
If you are a vegan, are you familiar with Dr. Greger? He's a doctor, a vegan doctor that promotes the vegan diet, plant-based diet on internet. And he has a food pyramid for vegans to make sure they're getting all the protein and all the other things they need. He recommends 2 servings a day. A serving is a half a cup of cooked legumes. So it's not hard. When we make for supper times, sometimes on Friday evening, we just have a big bowl of lentils. My wife puts some carrots and what else do you put in it? And some greens of some kind and whatever, and makes a nice bowl. But we eat probably 2 cups of it for supper. So we get our whole day's supply in that one little bowl of lentils. Yes, he's got a book, The How Not to Die. It's a very good book on healthy eating and so on. If you want to find out about plant-based diets, he's probably one of the best places to read on. He's an MD, and he's very careful in his research, and he documents everything, and he's one of the sources that you can take confidence in.
I was just going to say his online presence is nutritionfacts.org.
Uh-huh.
You can sign up for his newsletter and you'll get it. It will come to your mailbox, and if they don't charge you anything, he's not selling anything. The only thing he sells are the books. You can buy them at Costco. You can get them at your library. They're worth reading.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Greger.
Rager,
Uh-huh.
R-E,
G-E-R. See. Is it O-R? Not Y. No Y. Okay, so choose high fiber foods. We've got to hurry on this here. Notice, she's a diehard here, isn't she? So here's dietary fiber grams per day. By the way, how much should we eat? What's recommended? It's probably up there. Aim for 30 grams of fiber daily for best health. That was from this article here. Women ought to be getting at least 25 grams a day and higher, 26. And that's a minimum. And men somewhere around 28 or close to 30. So getting more is helpful. But notice as the fiber intake went up, here's what happened to risk of death from any cause. It was significantly lower. Those are not big changes, but it goes down. And so it just shows that those kinds of foods are healthy for us. Eat a lot of whole foods when possible. For example, an orange in place of orange juice, you get more fiber. Include legumes, they're the highest in fiber of all foods. And nuts in your diet daily. Eat more fruits and vegetables. If you eat a lot of those, the fiber adds up. And at least 3 servings of whole grains daily. When I buy a breakfast cereal, if it doesn't have at least 5 grams of fiber in it, I don't buy it. That eliminates about 90% of them or more. And 3 more servings of whole grains daily, and limit refined foods and animal foods which are fiber-free. And when you do that, you'll get plenty of fiber to be in good health. Okay, choose healthy fats. We're going to try to do this one quickly here. But here's healthy fats. What do they mean by that? First of all, they're low in saturated fat. It's the saturated fat that is the most damaging to the health. That's the one that's found mostly in meats and animal products and so on that cause the higher problems. They're high in unsaturated fatty acids. Okay? And they are trans fat free. If you're learning about trans fats has largely been taken out of our American diet. They used to be added when they would hydrogenate vegetable fats and add them to foods, but they're very damaging to their health, and so they've outlawed them. The only place you get trans fats in the diet now is mostly from animal foods. They are oils and not solid at room temperature, so you can tell them if it's sitting on the table and it's an oil, then it's mostly unsaturated. If it's a solid fat at room temperature, then it's mostly saturated.
what about coconut oil?
Coconut oil is highly saturated, and that's why it's solid at room temperature. And it comes primarily from vegetable sources. Now, the palm oil and the coconut oil come from vegetable sources, but they're solid fats. They're very high in saturated fats. And these kinds of fats then lower the risk for heart disease. Avocado is a good example. We had some good avocado in our dinner today, didn't we? All the research shows that when your avocado intake goes up, your cholesterol goes down, and a lot of other healthy benefits. So it's a good, healthy fat to use. You can eat a whole avocado or half an avocado a day if your waistline can take it.
Avocado tastes better.
I didn't bring those research. There's studies on avocado where they added extra avocado. And as the avocado intake went up, cholesterol levels went down. It's a healthy fat. So yeah, it's the kind of ones. Put it on your salads. We put it on our toast in the morning. Mash it and put it on our toast. And it's great. Use that in place of butter, you see. In place of the solid fats, we use the plant fats. Okay, so here's a big study. Again, 80,000 people, 14 years. They looked at the amount of vegetable fat intake. These are quintiles again, so each one is 20% more. So here's the people who are getting the lowest amount of vegetable fat, and here's the has the highest amount of vegetable fat, and what happens to the risk? So should you limit vegetable fat? Some people say all fat is bad, so they would cut out the oils and cut out everything, don't eat anything with fat in it. But what it actually shows, it's protective, doesn't it? I mean, you can't eat too much, obviously. But those who had the most, down here, had the lowest mortality. 40% drop in mortality. That's for risk of diabetes. So these plant fats, and these are the kind of fats that's found in the foods God intended for us to eat. They're automatically in the plant-based foods. Here's alpha-linoleic acid. Remember we said that's the one example of a fatty acid that's an omega-3 fatty acid. And those are important for making certain hormones and things in the body that's good for our health. And so here's a study, and I'm trying to think, is this the men? Yeah. Men with the highest intake of alpha-linoleic acid, that's the top one-third of the people that they studied, had 42% fewer deaths when compared to the people who were in the bottom third. So they just took all of these people, how many of them? 1,500 people. Most of them were doctors, by the way, doctors and nurses. And they divided them into three groups, those who had the highest intake and the third that had the lowest intake, compared their mortality levels over 15 years, and look at that big difference. Now, look at the difference. These are in grams. So the people who had the high risk were only 1.1 gram, and here they were at 2 grams. So it doesn't take much more than about 1 gram a day of alpha-linoleic acid to drop your risk of heart attack, men, by, 42%. So how can you get an extra gram of alpha-linoleic acid a day? That's the next slide. So here's some sources. Remember, you only need 1 or 2 grams. I like to get a little extra, so I go for at least, you can see here's what's recommended down here. So I like to get at least 2 or more grams, 2 to 3 grams. And 1 tablespoon of flax meal. Now, how do you eat flax meal? You can buy it in any store. Smith's has it and all the rest of them. But you can take a tablespoon and put it in your steel-cut oats and stir it in with the raisins and dates and whatever you like to put in it to make it a little sweeter. And there it is. It's easy. Or you can put it in other kinds of foods. We make waffles, homemade waffles. They're made out of whole grains and legumes. And I put in 1/4 of a cup of flax meal. And so we get a big serving of flax meal when we eat one of those waffles. So there's different things you can add it into your diet. It's real easy to do. You kind of have to learn how to do it. This cookbook that we've been giving out shows how to do a lot of that and can make a big difference. A 42% decrease in cardiovascular disease. I took it off because most people don't use the oil. The oil is even richer, isn't it? But I always like to eat the whole food rather than just the fat. Okay, that would do it too, wouldn't it? Chia seeds are very good if you like those. Walnuts are very good, aren't they? So we always have walnuts on our breakfast table, and we put them on our cereal, and we snack on them and things. And canola oil, of the different fats, canola oil is the highest in omega-3 fatty acids, and soy oil is also very high. I mean, that meets the minimum gram amount for just 1 tablespoon. So most salad dressings are made out of these, and so that's a good source of it too. That's why mayonnaise is high and why so on. Some of the other oils are not so high. Notice these down here are not so high. They're good in other kinds of ways. Okay, questions on alpha-linoleic acid? A small factor, just a tablespoon a day, put into something, make a big difference on your risk of heart disease. Now, I'm going to tell you about a PREDIMED study. Have you heard of the PREDIMED study, anybody? Some of you had. PREDIMED study. This is a place over in Mediterranean area. What was it? The ones that make all the olive oil. Spain. It's done in Spain. And they said, we want to look at putting fat in the diet and see what it does to your risk of heart disease. But they wanted to experiment particularly with olive oil. And the best kind of olive oil is what? Extra virgin olive oil. Yeah, so it's the least refined. So it has other good things in it, antioxidants and other kinds of things that's good for your health. So they took people who were all in a Mediterranean country, so they all ate a healthy diet. You've probably heard that the Mediterranean diet is healthy, and this is what the people were actually eating. And then they divided them into 3 groups. The controls, they ate the Mediterranean diet as they always did, which was healthy, but they were advised to cut back on eat less olive oil and fewer nuts. In other words, they were trying to reduce their fat intake in their diet. That was the two main sources of fat in their diet, was the olive oil and so on. If you live in those countries, they have olives every meal. I love it. If you like olives. Lots of them, and lots of olive oil, and they put it on everything. They put it on their pasta, and they put it on their salads, and they put it everywhere. And even their bread, instead of using butter, they use the olive oil, maybe a few seasonings, and it's a much healthier way to live, and that's why they have much less heart disease, those Mediterranean countries. The second group followed the Mediterranean diet, but instead of cutting back on nuts, they said, we want you to eat extra nuts, and we're going to give you nuts so that you can have a half a cup of nuts every day. That's quite a big serving of nuts, isn't it? A half a cup. And that was their group. And then the third group said, we're going to follow the Mediterranean diet, but we're going to give you more extra virgin olive oil. In fact, we're going to give you a little bottle every week. We want you to use it all up. Extra amount. Then they followed them for several years, and here's the results that came back. They were looking at heart attacks and strokes. Here's those who followed the healthy Mediterranean diet but were told to eat less fat. And then here are those who followed the good diet but ate more fat. In this case, an extra half a cup of nuts a day, and in this case, quite a bit of extra olive oil a day, and their risks dropped. Now, isn't that interesting? And we've been told for a long time that fat isn't good for us. Have you heard that? But it actually lowered their risk by 30%. They were going to continue the study on, but after they got this first report, they said, we're going to have to end the study because it's unethical for us to tell people to quit eating olive oil in their diet when we know that it's going to reduce their risk of heart attacks. So this was a very interesting study. Loma Linda, by the way, was involved in this. Some of the professors were involved in this study. So now the goal is not to avoid fats, but eat healthy fats. And so the mantra that we give now is include a healthy fat at every meal. It can be nuts and seeds, it can be nut butters. For spreads, you can use avocados and things on your salads, olives and extra virgin olive oil in your cooking. Other plant oils are also healthy. Hummus is a good fat that's got a lot of olive oil and things in it. Flax meal and chia seeds, very healthy for us. And it happens to be that soy is very high in fats of all the legumes. Most of the legumes are very low, but soy is very high. 40% of the calories in soy comes from fat, but it's a healthy fat, and also the one's high in the omega-3 fatty acids. So soy milk and edamame, if you're familiar with that, those little green soybeans and all of those, very good for us.
Isn't soy bad for you?
No, soy is good for you. How many of you heard that soy is bad for you? That's what we all hear, isn't it?
So the reason he asks is because that it says that in boys it produces more estrogen when they're growing when they eat a lot more soy. And
that's what they say.
That's right. Well, his doctor, when we took him to the doctor,
But that's not true.
She's like, yeah, he needs to eat more meat, and I'm like, well, he doesn't really eat meat like that. And
Yeah.
she's like, well, the soy is producing much more estrogen in his body, and you need to give him more meat. I was just like, well, we're not giving him more meat. We cut that.
Yeah, you've got the right idea. It's a philosophy that circulates on the web, and a lot of people now don't eat soy. In fact, they're changing from soy milk mostly to almond milk. And
that's why he's asking, because that's what his doctor,
Yeah.
doctor told him.
It's common. That's what's kind of called common knowledge. But when you look at the actual research, it doesn't do that. They thought for a while that and it's not estrogen that's in soybean; it's a phytoestrogen, and it doesn't work the same as estrogen in your body, but it does bind to the estrogen sites in the body. And when it does that, what it does is it blocks the body's production of estrogen, therefore actually reducing your risk for things like breast cancer in women. There have been 3 large studies, 2 in China and one in the United States, where they looked at soy intake, and in every case it significantly reduced the risk of cancer, breast cancer. And the amount that you get in a boy's diet, the phytoestrogen not being real estrogen, it has essentially no impact. So you don't have to worry about it. Well, he's misinformed.
Most doctors do not take a nutrition class. So when they want to talk to you about nutrition, realize you're talking to somebody that's probably getting his information from the internet and he never took a nutrition class.
There's another component in the United States, perhaps other countries, but what the recommendations are heavily influenced by industrial money. So you follow the money, the meat, U.S. Department of Agriculture, etc. Well, if soy goes up, then meat purchasing goes down, and we have complaints. And so you have to dig. Whenever you hear something, the red flag goes up, well, that's different.
In the Adventist Health Study, they looked at this issue. And in the men, there was less prostate cancer, and in the women, there was less breast cancer. And it is the richest source of protein in the plant kingdom. And so when you leave off meat and things, you need other healthy sources. And soy milk is an excellent source of protein and omega-3 fatty acids. And if you replace it with rice milk or almond milk, you look on the package, you see how much protein's there. In the one we use, we get 10 grams, 9 to 10 grams of protein in the soy milk. And in the almond milk or the rice milk, you get 1 gram. And real milk has about 8 grams per serving. So you're actually they'd be better off to use real cow's milk than to use rice milk and almond milk. There's nothing wrong with almonds, but it's just not enough almonds in it to make much difference. And then secondly, you look how much sugar they put in those. And the sugar is very high. And if you compare the glycemic index of rice milk, it's a high glycemic food, or almond milk. And if you look at soy milk, the glycemic index is about 21. It's almost off the scale on the bottom. It's so low. Any of those, if you look at the amount of protein, there's practically none. There's usually more sugar in it than there is oats. So I don't recommend any of those. If you want to use them, they're okay. You can get a few almond milks that has pea protein added, that adds the protein up, and that would be better. But the one we use soy milk that has no added sugar. And it's just the only ingredients is pure filtered water and soybeans. We've had many conferences on this at Loma Linda University. And when these speakers come in and share it, they said, it's just, don't worry about it, the stuff that's on the internet. It's just not accurate.
And in Asia, they have less, where they're eating a lot more soy and tofu. They have less breast cancer in a percentage compared to the U.S.
And Japan eats a lot of it, and they have the best longevity of any nation in the world. So it's nothing to be concerned about. This gentleman right here has got a question. Say it a little bit louder.
Unsweetened soy milk, like the unsweetened.
Yes, that's the best. Now, when you're young, you like sometimes a little sugar in it.
He didn't like it.
Oh, he didn't? Okay, I don't either.
He can't stand that sweet.
Yeah, I don't like it either. The unsweetened is better for you. Sugar doesn't add anything that's good for you.
Yeah, it tastes good though.
What'd she say?
He says it tastes better if it has sugar.
Yes, that's why they put it in it, because we're used to that. Once you get used to the other, you soon like it better. But if you have a little bit in it, just use those guidelines we've had up there, less than 6 teaspoons a day, and then you'll be fine. A little bit of sugar is not going to kill us.
I was just to also say, economics-wise, most of these plant milks, as he's pointing out, if you figure out, you can look on the almond milk and you can see how many grams of protein there are. You can go to one of the food things online and you can look to see how many grams of protein are in an almond, and you'll often find that you're paying gold for 4 almonds in water. And you would do just as well to soak it overnight and put it in your blender. And whether or not it's totally ground up or not, it makes a great cover if you're using dry cereal.
Here's the thing. A lot of Adventists, they're trying to get away from meat. That's their main source of protein, isn't it? And then they replace it with rice milk, which has practically no milk, no protein. And what is there is not a very high quality protein. Soy is high enough quality protein that you could live just on that protein alone. It's just as high as quality as meat or eggs. So for all of these reasons, at Loma Linda, we recommend that the soy is much preferable. That doesn't mean you can never eat these other things, but if you want a good, healthy diet, you should be using the others regularly. And if you're feeding it to children, it's nice if you can get ones that have B12 and calcium and things added to it so that it's a good milk equivalent too. All right. How are we coming here? How long have we been here? 3:30. Hour and a half already? Have you had enough?
No.
We're having fun and we're taking lots of questions, so I'm not through here yet. But I can go a little faster. But if some of you want to leave and you've had enough and you want to do something else, that's fine too. Was there a comment or something?
What's the brand of soy milk that you use that's like
We buy the one at Smith's.
It's called West Soy. Okay.
No.
Yes, it is.
Is it?
It's about the only one left
Okay.
on the market. Trader Joe's does have, it was last I checked, has a plain soy milk, but the competition against soy has been so stiff that a lot of
They quit making it because the people heard on the internet that soy was bad for you.
Not so much that it's bad, GMO, genetically modified foods.
It's not made out of genetically modified soy. It says right on the package, it's made out
As long
of.
as you watch that, that's what people,
Uh-huh.
so,
And of course, the genetically modified soy is all fed to the animals. If you don't want GMO, then don't eat the animals because that's where it all ends up.
Back here,
Oh, up in the front row.
I have a question about nuts.
Uh huh.
What's the difference between raw nuts and roasted nuts? Is there a difference?
They're nutritionally, there's not much difference. If you like them roasted, eat them roasted. Most people do. I tried raw peanuts once, and it's pretty different.
It's a legume, that's why.
You can boil raw peanuts, though. Boiled peanuts are so awesome.
She comes from the South.
Well, no, my family came from the South. I was born in California.
When you cook a food with protein in it, what you're doing is you're denaturing the protein a little bit, and it's just absorbed better.
Nothing is better.
The protein is always absorbed better when it's cooked than when it's raw. Almost
They
always.
should do that here in the stores like they do.
Healthy proteins, can we go through this quickly? Protein content, we can see that all foods have, if they're unrefined, have protein in them. And here's legumes up here towards the top, just as much as, where's the meat? I don't even see it on there. Here's fish, skinless poultry, and so on was a healthier form of meat than some of the others. So the legumes just right up there, aren't they? So they're very good sources. That's what I get all mine from mostly. Or low-fat milk or yogurt is fairly good. And then the soy milk below has the same amount. You don't have to worry about the animal things. And soybeans, veggie burgers. Did you like the little veggie burger that they used on top of the...
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay, sure. So that's another example. And especially if you've been raised with using meat and so on, those make the food a little more palatable and make it easier to leave the real meat off. So you can see down through here. Whole grains give you quite a little bit there. And sometimes people, when they make smoothies and so on, if it's mostly just fruit, they're not eating anything else, they might want to put some protein supplement in their smoothie so it's not just all carbohydrate. There's a study on legumes and longevity. And 785 seniors followed for 7 years, and they found that legumes were found to be the best predictor of a longer life of any other food they looked at. For every 20 grams increase in daily intake of legumes, mortality dropped by 7 to 8%. So legumes are good for you. If you eat more of them, your mortality rate falls. Now here's the difference. Here's looking at meat intake. This is red meat. This is done by Harvard, and quite a large number of people, as you can see. And they looked at the meat intake. These are the percentiles again. So this is the 20% who eat the lowest amount of meat, and the 20% who eat the highest amount. And every time there's an increase in meat in the diet, what happens to mortality? There's a measurable increase. This is for cancer. Oh no, this is total. Yeah, cancer mortality. Same is true for heart disease. I don't know if I put the all rest of them in. Yeah, here's one for all-cause mortality, even more than that last one. So every time there's an increase in meat. So looking at that chart, how much meat should you eat? 0. As low as you can get it for the ideal situation. And when working with other groups, we say if you're going to use meat, don't use it more than once or twice a week. And that would be this group down here. And if you want it lower yet, drop it even lower. How about eggs? Thanks for coming. Eggs, if you look at the number of eggs eaten per week, what do you see? Well, not really. Well, let's disregard that one. So between less than one per week and up to 5 or 6 per week, there's not a measurable increase in this particular study. But by the time you started getting them every day, pretty soon now the mortality starts going up, so it's 22%. So if you're going to eat eggs, how many should you eat a week? Not too many. Heart Association recommends 3 or 4 per week, probably reasonable. So it's not a big factor for raising heart disease. If you don't want to eat eggs, you don't have to. We eat them very occasionally, but there's other things you can eat too.
Did you ever conclude why? Because when you look at the white, it's all protein. You look at the yolk, that's all really good fat in there. What is it that's in egg that would increase?
The cholesterol. It's a very high source of cholesterol. So when you get it very high, it probably contributes in that
So
sense.
do you have studies where you eat eggs, cholesterol goes up?
Well, that's what this study shows. Well, this is looking at, it's better than the cholesterol, it's looking at mortality.
All cause mortality. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we're really looking at with eggs is they're not too bad. And if you want to use a few eggs, I don't have a problem with that. But if you eat them every day, it might not be so good. But if you want other sources, you can do it, and you don't have to worry about disease that might be in the animals and so on. Pastor.
What about egg whites instead of using?
Well, the egg whites, as he was saying, is all protein. So my wife gets a little thing out of Costco. It's called an egg frittata, and it's made with greens and other things in it. It's all egg whites. And she likes those. That won't raise your cholesterol at all. It's got a little dairy products in it.
They're good, man.
So I eat tofu.
Tofu eggs, yeah.
But you see, I've been raised in that medicine. I ate tofu all my life. And my wife has been raised on the other kinds of things. And so it's not a big factor. These are some things that's just real small, and other things that's big factors. So these are alternatives you can use. So the Lord gives us choice, doesn't he?
So is there any other food that has all the essential amino acids in it? Because eggs do.
Eggs do. Animal beef does. And chicken and fish. All the flesh products do. And in the plant kingdom, there's a few products that do. Soy is one.
Okay.
Another one is this new grain that's out. I just said it a while ago. Quinoa.
All the essential.
All the essential amino acids are available and can sustain life on their own. And I think there's one more. Anyway, that's another reason I recommend the soy milk, because it is a high quality protein. Now, if you take grains and legumes together, lentils are not high enough quality to sustain life by themselves. But if you eat it with a piece of toast, whole grain bread, then they complement one another, and it is the same as a high quality protein. So that's what's important in the vegetarian life, is to eat a variety of foods. And the grains are low in lysine and high in methionine, I think it is. The beans are low in methionine, they're high in lysine, they're put together, and they have the right ratio of amino acids for as good a growth as meat or eggs. But eggs is the highest quality protein we know of, except for one other food, human breast milk.
Gave up on that a long time ago.
But it has the ideal ratio next to egg. Dairy products, there's vegetarians and vegans. And vegans don't use any animal products. Vegetarians use a little. And this study that they've done that shows the 100-year-old people in Loma Linda? What do you suppose most of them are?
Vegan.
No.
Vegetarian.
They're mostly vegetarian. Because there weren't even such a thing as a vegan when they were growing up.
Yeah, there was a.
That term hadn't been invented yet. So most of them are lacto-ovo-vegetarians, and they're the ones that's living to be 100. So that's preferable. And when you look at the actual studies, there's not much difference between a vegan and ovo-lacto-vegetarian mortality. I didn't bring that slide up there on my computer, but they compare them all. The next one, and so on dairy, we're just saying if you're going to use dairy, the recommendation is usually to be careful of the high-fat ones. Don't use those very often. Use the lower-fat ones, preferable. Probably the very best one would be a low-fat yogurt. Yes. Oh, I need to bring this up. Thanks. Okay, then here's the one where they compare non-vegetarians in the Adventist church and the vegetarians. Now, all the Adventists generally eat a little better and they have better health in a variety of ways. But if you just compare the amount of meat in the diet, notice there's a significant drop. So this would be vegetarians. Vegans, about the same. For women, actually, the vegans are a little higher than the ovo-lacto-vegetarians, and the pesco-vegetarians are a little lower. Pastor says we need to finish in 2 minutes.
You want to ask questions, take questions?
And here's the nuts. Recommendations is we need to eat nuts regularly. 40% lower risk of heart disease, less stroke, less death from any causes in the Adventist Health Study. Here's the Adventist Health Study. Yeah, a handful of nuts a day. There's the Adventists that never ate nuts. Those who used them 1 to 4 times per week, and those who had them 5 times a week. Half the risk of heart attacks. So, easy thing to do. Salt. We need to be careful of salt in foods. And here's just a quick graph to show you that. As your sodium intake goes up in the diet, look at mortality rates. So salt and salty foods, be very careful of those. Cut back on those. And it's usually found in foods that are already made up that you buy them on the shelf. Here's the processed foods. So you have to read the labels, don't you, to get a low sodium food.
You're not talking about sea salt there.
Just
You're talking about refined
sodium. Yeah, sodium in the diet. So here is now just a quick, illustrates why it's added in the foods. So here's a fresh green beans, a half a cup. It only has 2 milligrams of sodium. That's the way the Lord made it. Okay? And then when you buy it canned, 170. What's the difference? Well, they add it. So it's what's added to food that gets us into trouble. And here's a fresh tomato, only 11 milligrams of sodium. If you get it canned, and again, 400 milligrams. Those are huge amounts. So it's in the processing process again that gets us in trouble. If we eat the food the way the Lord made it, much, much less. Now the goal is to eat less than 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day. If you read the labels, it tells you how much is in foods. Try to find the lower ones. And along with that, what we find is there's an interaction between sodium and potassium. Sodium raises your risk of mortality. Potassium lowers it. That's what we see here. So as your potassium level goes up, notice what happens to your risk. Now, where do you find potassium? All fruits and vegetables. So look at the sodium-potassium difference. Here's an orange. Very low in sodium, very high in potassium. What will that do for blood pressure? Just perfect. Helps to keep it lower. And bananas and avocados and all of these, it's that way. It's only when you get down to the processed foods that it's high. So the goal is to eat less sodium but more potassium. And so there is a food, something you can use for salt at home now, that's called light salt. Are you familiar with it? You can buy it in any of the stores. And it's 60%, it's 60% less sodium and twice as much potassium. And so when you use that in place of regular salt, it's helpful in lowering risk of problems.
No, it actually does. This is an.
I have it in my cupboard, I don't like it.
You might not be. Are you using the Leslie's one? That's a narrow container. It's light blue and dark blue.
Yeah.
Okay, because some
If
people
you
are
use a lot of
using
salt,
something else,
it doesn't
and
give
I
you
always
as
go,
much salt as the other salt.
I wouldn't
I
use
like
that either.
the pink salt.
Yeah, it's very high in sodium.
I know.
That's why you like it.
That's good, yeah.
My dad was that way too.
Yeah, he circled the plate. How many times?
And just to finish up, we've got 2 principles. We'll do it in 60
I was
seconds.
just gonna say, in the Michael Brader, some of his cookbooks, they have no salt seasonings that you can make at home. They're pretty good. Obviously,
For most of us, you don't have to avoid all sodium, just don't use too much. But the average American eats too much. So if you cut it about in half what the average American eats, it'd be in closer to what's healthy. Eating breakfast daily, I won't say too much, except there's a lot of studies been done on that. And in that Alameda County study, they found that those who ate breakfast daily lived longer than those who didn't. And then lastly here, drink plenty of water. We're 60% water. And so we need to have water for our circulation, water for our brain. And it helps to prevent constipation. It helps the brain to work better when you're well hydrated. If you get dehydrated, One of the first symptoms is you become confused and the brain doesn't work well. It helps with constipation. There's a whole host of things that water is important for us. It's a simple thing to do, and make sure that you do all of that. So by eating healthfully, it helps us to look and feel our best, cut the risk of those serious diseases, adds years of life to our health. And I like this verse in 1 Corinthians 10:31. Whatever you eat or whether you drink, whatever you do, do what? Do all to the glory of God. So hopefully this has been helpful for you to make good choices. And God doesn't say you have to do one thing one way, but we can make good choices for a variety of things. Thank you.
Once again, how many are we thankful for Don this weekend? Thank you so much. It's a blessing to have him part of our church family. So whenever we have time for fellowship, whenever we have time, I'm going to put you here on the hot spot. Whenever we have potluck, pick his brain out. He's part of our church family. So just thank you guys so much. Don, Trish, thank you so much for being part of our church family. Like I said, the plan is later this year we'll have more of these kind of health segments, maybe once a month type of thing later on this year around the winter time. But for now, let's just please stand. Let's get the blood flowing, and we'll conclude with a word of prayer. Our Heavenly Father, thank you so much for today and for yesterday, for this weekend. Through these messages, you have reminded us, as we just read, whatever we do, and that includes our diet, that includes our physical health, we are to do for your glory. Our bodies are your temple. It's where you dwell. So it's our responsibility to keep it as healthy as possible. So Father, please give us the will and the desire to do what is best for ourselves. Bless our lives. May we have quality of life. And Father, at the end of the day, all we want to do is just get to see you soon. So just bless us as a church, bless us as a community. Continue to provide wisdom and blessings over Don and his ministry, or his wife as well. And again, just continue to be with us. Thank you so much for this Sabbath. Thank you for the week that's going to begin pretty here soon. And we commend ourselves to you. In your name, Jesus, amen. You guys are dismissed. Don't forget, this Wednesday we're going to start early, 5:30, because we will have food. Yes, Noreen. Okay, so we need some help. So we need some tables and chairs to be pushed back. So please go help if we can, please. Especially gentlemen with our physical strength. And then Kathy, right? Kathy, 5:30 this Wednesday? 5:30 for food before Wednesday night prayer meeting. Blessings.